Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story.
Story number 1. There was a driver named Sam Mercer who had been running freight for almost 20 years. The road had changed a lot in that time. New bypasses, bigger rest areas, more bright blue screens glowing behind steering wheels. But the long, empty stretches still felt the same. Blacktop, white lines, and a darkness that always seemed to be waiting just beyond the reach of the high beams. It was on one of those stretches, cutting across a sparsely populated state in late autumn, that something happened to Sam he never found a way to explain. The run was simple: overnight haul, refrigerated trailer, a tight schedule but nothing impossible. The dispatch route sent him along an interstate he knew well, a route he had driven so many times he could almost feel every upcoming curve in his hands before he saw it. By 2 a.m, the cab was a little too warm and his eyes felt heavy in that strange way they did after hours of steady focus. The outside world had turned to silhouettes, dark shapes of trees, occasional distant farm lights, and the soft glimmer of stars whenever clouds parted. The radio murmured low, more company than entertainment. The fuel gauge needle hovered just above a quarter tank, not urgent, but not something to ignore out there either. He checked the GPS. According to the screen, the next proper truck stop was still over an hour away. Not ideal. He could push it, and normally he might, but there had been stories about unexpected closures lately, staff shortages, pumps offline, things like that. Stopping earlier was safer. A green sign slid into view on the right, reflecting the headlights with that familiar pale glow. Exit 229, Dunning, Gas, Food, Lodging. The name meant nothing to him. He knew almost every town along this route, if not by experience then by name alone, yet Dunning didn't ring a single bell. He frowned, glancing at the GPS again. No exit 229 showed on the map. The navigator insisted the next service exit was 236, then 257. Still, he'd seen temporary exits before, new construction not yet updated. It wasn't unusual. The lack of any other information nagged at him, but the words gas and food were hard to ignore. The fuel gauge ticked down just a hair more, and he made up his mind. The indicator clicked on. The big rig drifted into the right lane, then onto the off-ramp. The exit curved gently downward, the darkness thickening as he left the main highway. There were no other vehicles ahead of him, no taillights to follow. Just the reflective edge posts marking the curve and the soft rumble of tires over the seams. At the bottom of the ramp, a second sign appeared, older looking than the bright green Interstate 1. White letters on a faded blue background spelled out, Dunning Travel Plaza, 0.5 mi. Half a mile, easy. The 2-lane road that followed had no streetlights. The world became narrower, tree branches leaning in on both sides. His headlights caught the sudden glint of an old reflector nailed to a post, then a small bridge with iron railings. The river below was invisible, but the slight change in sound under the wheels gave it away. A thin fog seemed to hang low over the black water, just briefly visible as the beams passed over it. Then, as if someone had simply dropped it in the middle of nowhere, the Travel Plaza appeared. Sodium vapor lights buzzed above a wide concrete lot, casting that familiar dull orange glow over rows of parking spaces. A large sign, lit unevenly, declared, Dunning Travel Plaza, open 24 hours. The building itself looked like any number of older truck stops, long, low, with a line of windows and a diner entrance on one side. A row of fuel pumps stood off to the right, their lighted numbers pale in the cool air. A wave of relief moved through him. Fuel, food, a quick break, then back on the road. He pulled around to the diesel islands, easing the rig alongside a pump. As the engine idled down, he noticed something. No other trucks were there. No reefers humming, no distant hiss of air brakes, no slow movement of headlights sweeping across the lot. There were a few cars parked near the front doors, but they were spaced strangely apart, as if they hadn't moved in some time. One of them looked like an older sedan from the 90s, its paint dull and tires slightly sagging. It crossed his mind that maybe it was just a slow night. Remote locations could be like that. He took a breath, shut down the engine, and climbed out. The night air felt colder than it had on the highway. Not the damp cold of approaching winter, but a stillness that made each exhale look too loud, too visible. The sound of the engine ticking as it cooled echoed in the emptiness. He grabbed the fuel nozzle and started the pump. Or tried to. The digital screen on the pump flickered once, then steadied on a row of zeros. He swiped his card. The machine accepted it with a soft beep. The pump engaged and the numbers began to climb, gallons and dollars ticking upward in crisp red digits. As fuel flowed into the tank, he looked at the building again. The windows were lit, but he couldn't see anyone moving inside. The diner sign glowed a warm yellow, but no silhouettes passed behind the glass. The neon open sign buzzed faintly, a single corner flickering. The night pressed in around the lit island of concrete and glass. The only sounds were the low, steady chug of the fuel and the faint buzz of insects drawn to the lights. He told himself not to be ridiculous. Not every stop was busy. Not every place with lights had to be filled with people. The pump clicked off. The display read more gallons than he expected, almost too many, given how much fuel he'd pictured still in the tank. Maybe he had misjudged. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning solution. The first thing he noticed was how quiet it was. A television mounted in a corner showed a muted weather report, the radar sweeping in cold greens and blues, but no sound came from it. Music played gently from ceiling speakers, something soft and slow from decades past, but it felt strangely distant, as if coming from another room. The second thing he noticed was the clock. Above the entrance to the small diner area, a round wall clock with black hands and bold numbers read exactly 2:17. A quick glance at his own watch showed 2:17 as well. Nothing odd about that, until he looked again 10 minutes later and saw the hands hadn't moved. The cashier stood behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with a neatly pressed vest and a name tag that read Marlene. Her smile was polite, fixed in place. "Even in," she said, though it was well past midnight. Her voice was calm, almost sleepy. "How's the road treating you?" "Quiet," he replied, "fueling up, gonna grab a coffee, you open all night." "Always," she said, "always open, you runnin' through to the city." He blinked. "Yeah, how'd you know?" She shrugged lightly. "Not many options out this way. Most just pass through. Just glad you decided to stop. Some don't, they should." Something in the way she said that last part caught at him, but before he could ask, another sound drew his attention. The soft clink of cutlery, the faint scrape of a chair. Someone was in the diner. He moved toward the doorway, curious. Inside, the booths were lined up in a neat row, the vinyl upholstery worn but clean. A few old framed photos of highway scenes decorated the walls, trucks from another era, smiling attendants next to gas pumps that belonged in museums. Near the back, a man sat alone in a booth, his back to the room. He wore a heavy work jacket, the kind truckers favored, with reflective stripes across the shoulders. On the back of the jacket, a faded logo stood out, the name of Sam's own company in the same stylized letters. It made him pause. Company jackets were common, but something about the particular wear and fatting of the cloth looked familiar. Almost like his first company jacket, the one he had retired years ago. The man's shoulders were hunched slightly, as if very tired. One hand rested on a coffee mug. The other was out of sight, down by his side. "Kitchen closed," Sam called out, more to test the air than because he needed food. "Just coffee tonight." The man didn't move, didn't turn his head. Marlene appeared beside him, as if she had walked there without a sound. "Coffee's always on," she said. "Take any seat you like." He gestured toward the occupied booth, "That one taken." Her expression didn't change. "He's just resting, best to let him be." A chill slid along the back of his neck, though no cold air moved. He settled into a booth a few spaces away, where he could keep the man in his peripheral vision. Marlene poured him a mug of coffee, dark, with no visible steam. He wrapped his hands around it anyway, more out of habit than desire. The mug felt warm enough, but when he took a cautious sip, it tasted strangely flat, as if it had been sitting for hours. The music above shifted into another old song, one he half recognized from years ago. The singer's voice was low and echoing, the lyrics just out of reach of understanding. He looked up at the clock again, 2:17. His watch said 2:29. A quiet unease began to build, small and stubborn, the kind of feeling that didn't shout, but whispered insistently that something was wrong. He glanced at the man in the jacket. The figure hadn't moved at all, not to drink, not to adjust his position, not to scratch or shift, or do any of the dozens of small things people do without thinking. The set of his shoulders remained exactly the same. No rise or fall suggested breathing. A thought drifted into his mind, undesired. What if he stands up and it's your own face you see? He pushed the idea away. Just a tired imagination in a too-quiet room. "You get many drivers through here?" he asked, trying to fill the silence. Marlene was wiping the already clean counter with slow, methodical strokes. "Enough," she said. "Sometimes more than we'd like when the weather turns. Storms push them in. Fog. Accidents. They come off the interstate needing a place to stop. Sometimes they don't leave right away." He forced a laugh. "What they like the coffee that much?" She smiled in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Something like that." The lights flickered just once. The television in the corner hiccuped, the weather radar freezing for a moment before resuming its silent spin. Outside, the fluorescent sign hummed louder, the sound faintly audible even through the glass. Sam looked back at the man, still unmoving. He stood up suddenly, unable to help himself, and pretended to stretch. As naturally as he could, he angled his path toward the back, as if heading to the restrooms, which were conveniently located in that direction. As he drew closer to the booth, details sharpened. The fabric of the jacket, the shape of the man's hand on the mug, the side of his face barely visible in profile. The skin looked oddly pale in the diner's light. The stubble on his jaw was the same salt and pepper coloration as Sam's own. The line of the nose, the curve of the ear, it all seemed unnervingly similar. But the eyes, he realized, were what he was afraid to see. He took 2 more steps, enough to bring the man's face into clearer view. The booth was empty. His heart lurched. Just an empty seat, a clean table, and a single ceramic mug sitting in the exact spot where he had seen a hand resting moments before. No coffee inside. Dry. A sound behind him made him spin around. Marlene stood by the counter, watching calmly. "Restrooms the other way," she said. He looked back at the booth, then at her. "Thought someone was sitting here." "Nights can play tricks," she replied. "Long hours on the road, you're tired. Get your coffee, top off your tanks, and you'll be fine." He realized then that he couldn't hear any trucks outside. No engines starting, no doors shutting. The lot had been empty when he arrived, but something about the complete silence pressed at his eardrums. He checked his watch again, 2:34. The wall clock, 2:17. Somewhere between his ribs, a small, quiet instinct spoke up, firm and clear. "Leave." He set cash on the counter instead of using his card again. Marlene picked it up with that same polite smile, as if this happened every night in exactly the same way. "Drive safe," she said. "Watch yourself at mile marker 243. People forget to slow down there." He paused. He hadn't mentioned his route, or his destination, or the mile markers he'd be passing. "How do you know?" "Seen a lot of runs," she answered smoothly. "Road doesn't change much, people don't either." Outside, the cold felt different, thicker. The orange light from the overhead lamps seemed to stop abruptly at the edge of the pavement, beyond which only darkness waited. He climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The gauges flickered to life. The fuel needle jumped so high it startled him. The tank read not just full, but slightly above the full mark, as if overfilled. The engine sounded better somehow, stronger. The cab lights were bright and crisp. For a moment he thought about staying a little longer, just to be sure he wasn't overreacting. Then he looked up. In the side mirror, the travel plaza appeared different, dimmer. The lights seemed fewer. The big main sign that had blazed Dunning Travel Plaza moments before now looked faded, one entire side dark. He blinked hard and turned to look directly. Everything looked normal again, lit, clean, quiet. The unease solidified. He eased the rig into gear and rolled toward the exit drive, following the small arrows painted on the cracked pavement. No other vehicles moved. No other engines hummed. As he turned back onto the two-lane access road, he glanced at the plaza one more time in the mirror. This time, the building didn't look open at all. The windows were black. The neon sign was dead. The tall lights that had bathed the lot in orange were off, leaving only the faint suggestion of shapes in the dark. The big sign's face was blank, its paint peeling. It looked abandoned, long abandoned. A jolt of adrenaline hit so hard his hands tightened on the wheel. His breathing picked up. He forced himself not to slam the brakes, not to stop, not to reverse and stare. The bridge appeared again, the iron rails catching his headlights. The brief glimmer of the unseen river. Then the entrance ramp to the interstate opened before him, and he took it, almost grateful for the familiar roar of passing wind as he merged back onto the endless ribbon of highway. The main line felt different, comforting even in its monotony. The green signs now matched his GPS perfectly. No mention of Dunning. No exit 229, nothing out of place. He drove in silence for a long time, the radio off. Only when he finally reached a major truck stop near a larger town did he realize how tense his shoulders had been, how tightly he'd been gripping the steering wheel. Inside the busy, brightly lit travel center, with people laughing and talking and coffee that actually steamed, he let himself breathe. At the counter, while paying for another coffee he probably didn't need, he asked casually, "Hey, there used to be another stop out on the interstate, around, I don't know, between 220 and 230. Old place, called Dunning maybe." The cashier, a younger man with tired eyes, paused mid-scan. "Dunning," he repeated slowly. "The Dunning Plaza." "Yeah," Sam said. "Just fueled there, quiet little place." The cashier shook his head, a slight frown forming. "Can't be. That place burned down, 15, 20 years ago, before I even started here. Electrical fire in the walls, they said. Took the whole building. Couple folks didn't make it out, I think. They never rebuilt. That exit been closed as long as I can remember." Sam stared at him, a hollow feeling spreading in his chest. "You sure?" His voice sounded far away to his own ears. "Pretty sure," the cashier said. "My uncle used to talk about it. Said he stopped there the night before it happened. After that, they tore down the ramps. Nothing out there now but overgrown access roads and an empty lot." The receipt printer spat out a small slip of paper. Mechanically, the cashier handed it over. "Here you go, have a good one." Hands slightly unsteady, Sam reached for his wallet. When he opened it to tuck the new receipt inside, something else slipped out, falling into his palm. A folded slip of thin paper, slightly yellowed at the edges. The print across the top read, "Dunning Travel Plaza." Below, in faint ink, the numbers showed the amount of diesel he had just pumped, the date, and the time. The date was 20 years earlier, down to the day. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. He stared at it until the edges of the receipt blurred. Then, very carefully, he folded it back up and slid it deep into the hidden space behind his ID. He didn't show it to anyone. He never threw it away. On every run that took him past where exit 229 should have been, he paid extra attention. There was a long stretch of concrete barrier now, no signs, no ramps. Just a dark smudge of trees where a road might once have cut through. Sometimes, when the night was very still, he imagined he could see a faint orange glow through those trees, like distant parking lot lights. He never stopped there again. But occasionally, when another driver spoke of weird exits that didn't show up on their maps or loan plazas that felt strangely disconnected from the world, he would listen a little more closely. Not every place on the highway stays gone when it's closed. Some exits, it seems, never really leave. They just wait, lights humming softly in the middle of nowhere, for someone a little too tired and a little too low on fuel to decide that one quick stop couldn't hurt. Story number 2. Lisa drove nights by choice. She liked the way the world narrowed after midnight, how the sky turned into a solid black dome and the only thing that really existed was the white line stretching ahead of her. Out here, with her hands on the wheel and the engine humming steady beneath her feet, life felt simple. You watched the road. You watched your gauges. You kept going. Her handle on the CB was Ravenwing, a name she'd picked years ago on a run through the mountains. These days, she barely used the radio except for traffic updates. Most of the chatter was background noise now. Music from someone's phone bleeding into a hot mic, bored jokes, the occasional warning about a speed trap. That night the sky was building toward a storm. Lightning flashed far off on the horizon, but the rain hadn't reached her yet. The highway was almost empty, a dark band cutting through endless fields. The dash clock read 1:42 a.m. Her ETA put her just outside the next big city by dawn, provided nothing strange happened. The first odd thing was the static. It came in a sudden, soft rush across the CB, like someone had leaned on their transmit button while the wind howled through their window. She glanced at the unit on the dash. Channel 19, normal as ever. The little red light showed an open carrier, but no one was talking. She reached out and lowered the volume slightly. The static shifted just a little. There was a shape to it now, like someone trying to speak from a long way off. Breaker 19, a voice whispered through the haze. Breaker 19, anybody copy? She froze. The voice sounded like hers. Not just similar, a passing resemblance here or there, but the same roughness on certain words, the same slight scratch of wear from years of coffee and late nights, the same tightness that crept in when she was masking nerves with calm. Her hand hovered over the mic. She swallowed once, eyes still on the road. Ravenwing to Breaker, she said, trying to keep it easy. You're coming in weird, friend, go ahead. For a moment the static deepened, then thinned again. Is anyone there? The voice repeated, clearer now. This is Ravenwing, mile marker. I think I'm near 104. If anybody hears this, I need to know I'm not. The transmission cut off with a soft pop. Lisa's skin prickled, her own handle, her own tone, the same tiny hitch before she said the word need. She flipped her headlights briefly to high, scanning the distant pavement. Mile marker 97 flashed past on the right. She'd hit 104 in a few minutes. Very funny, she muttered to herself. Skip's weird tonight. Sometimes radio signals bounced funny off the atmosphere. Voices from states away could skip in unexpectedly. Maybe some other night driver had decided to borrow her handle and play a prank. That was all. Lightning flashed again, closer this time. The faint outline of storm clouds loomed ahead, like mountains growing out of the sky. The CB crackled. Ravenwing to anyone, the voice said again. It was unmistakably hers now, only threaded through with something she didn't want to admit was fear. There's a black pickup behind me. No lights. No plates. I can see it in the mirror, but I can't remember when it showed up. Lisa checked her side mirror automatically. Night and the faint ghost of her own trailer. No pickup, no headlights. She reached for the mic, then drew back. It was too strange. Playing along felt like stepping onto a staircase that might not be there. The voice continued, softer. If you hear this, don't take the rest exit at Green Hollow. It's not right, just keep going. Promise me you'll keep going. The name hit harder than she expected. Green Hollow. She passed a small rest area by that name earlier that evening, on the opposite side of the highway. It was an older place, just a few truck spaces and a couple of vending machines surrounded by trees. She planned to stop at the next one instead. A bigger turnout with proper showers. Her throat felt dry. Cut it out, she whispered to the empty cab. This is stupid. Just someone with a scanner and a good impression, that's all. But she kept listening. The next 7 miles rolled by slowly. When the mile marker 104 sign finally slid into her headlights, she leaned closer to the windshield without meaning to. Nothing waited there except the usual. A thin strip of gravel shoulder, a dark field, the far-off flicker of lightning. The radio stayed silent. Minutes stretched. The road curved slightly, then straightened. A green sign ahead announced, Green Hollow Rest Area 1 mile. Lisa felt her fingers tighten on the wheel. The CB came to life again, sudden and sharp. I didn't see him get closer, her own voice was saying, more urgent now. That's the thing. One moment he was a ways back, next moment he was right on me, like the road folded. If you hear this, you have to listen. Don't look at him when you pass, don't look. The transmission spiked with a squeal of interference, then went dead. Her heartbeat had climbed into her throat. Okay, she said aloud, forcing herself to breathe. Okay, that's enough. She reached for the dial to switch channels. Before she could, another sound slipped in beneath the static, a soft, rhythmic click, like a turn signal left on somewhere in the dark. Click, click, click. Lightning flared, washing the world in brief white. In that flash, her mirror showed a hint of something far back on the road, a shape, low, possibly a pickup. Then night again. Her stomach clenched. This was ridiculous. There were thousands of black pickups in the world. Seeing one on a highway was hardly supernatural. The rest area sign loomed, a half mile. Ahead, she saw the faint green glow of its entrance sign, the scattering of dim lights past the trees. The thought of pulling in there, parking under those lonely lamps, suddenly made her chest feel too tight. Don't take the rest exit at Green Hollow. Her own voice again, repeating in her head. She drove past. As she did, she made the mistake of glancing sideways. The rest area entrance curved gently off the road, empty. The lot beyond looked almost peaceful. A single car sat under a lamp, its windows black. No trucks, no movement. But near the exit lane, where vehicles would rejoin the highway, something seemed to stand just at the edge of the light. Not a vehicle, not a sign, just a darker patch of shadow, man-shaped, too still. She snapped her eyes back to the road. Adrenaline surged, making her fingers tingle. The CB clicked over to life again. Good, the voice breathed. You passed it, that's good. I didn't, not the first time. A cold line traced its way up Lisa's spine. What do you mean, not the first time? She whispered. Her hand hovered over the mic but didn't pick it up. Some instinct she didn't know she had told her not to talk, not to answer, not to invite anything closer. On the radio, her own voice kept speaking, unaware of her silence. I pulled in, it said, shaky now. Told myself I needed a break. The storm was worse then, I think, I'm not sure, the clocks don't match, the lot was empty. Saw a guy by the bathrooms, told me my trailer lights were out. They never were. When I checked the back, the pickup had moved. Closer. No sound, just closer. Lisa swallowed. The lightning was overhead now, bright and frequent, but the rain still held off as if waiting. A faint smudge of headlights appeared in her mirror. The road was long and straight behind her. The lights were low, spaced like those of a smaller vehicle, a pickup maybe, or a van. She told herself not to look again. She looked anyway. The headlights followed at a steady distance, too far to read a shape clearly, but undeniably there. Coincidence, she said under her breath. Just a random driver. On the CB, the other Lisa's breathing had grown fast, uneven. I tried to leave, the voice said. But every time I got back on the highway, I saw the same sign again. Green Hollow 1 mile. Same curve, same trees. He was always behind me, never closer, never farther, like the road was a record skipping. I think I must have driven it a dozen times, maybe more. I lost count. The thunder rolled, deep and low. Lisa glanced at the dashboard clock, 2:03. She checked her phone, 2:17. She frowned. That was odd. She was careful about keeping them synced. Somewhere they had slipped. The voice went on. If you're hearing this, maybe you're the one who got out, or maybe I am. I don't know which side of it this is. But listen, if a trooper waves you down near mile 112, don't stop. It isn't a trooper anymore. A chill, unlike any she'd felt before, sank into her ribs. Up ahead, a reflective sign broke the dark. Mile 111. Her pulse tripped. The headlights in her mirror seemed a fraction closer now, not gaining much, just nearer. She stared straight ahead, knuckles white on the wheel. Come on, she whispered to herself. Call someone, call dispatch, call anyone. Her phone lay in its cradle. No service bar flickered, just a red no signal icon where there should have been network strength. Sure, she breathed, of course. The CB hissed softly, as if something were breathing right beside her ear. Then he'll try to sound tired, the other Lisa said. That's how you know. Real troopers sound bored. This one sounds wrong. Lightning burst ahead again, lighting up the next green board. Mile 112. And there, just beyond the sign, a vehicle sat on the shoulder. Roof lights off. Driver's side door open. A figure in a reflective vest stood beside it, arm raised in that universal motion. Slow down, pull over. Lisa's heart hammered. The vehicle was shaped like a state cruiser. The vest glimmered in her beams. The man's hand moved in a small, weary wave, like someone who'd been out there too long. She eased off the accelerator, foot hovering over the brake. On the radio, her own voice screamed, sudden and raw, "Don't stop." The sound shocked her foot back to the pedal. Instinct overrode training. She kept moving. As she passed, she couldn't help it. Her eyes darted to the side window. The man's face never came fully into view, only the lower half, washed in the glow of her headlights. His mouth was stretched into a smile that was almost right, but there was no exhaustion in it. No frustration, just expectation. His eyes, hidden under the brim of his hat, never turned to follow her, but she had the distinct, unnerving sense that they didn't need to. That once he had seen her once, wherever she went would be enough. She pushed the accelerator a little more. The rig responded, steady but heavy, rising in speed. The CB sputtered. "He's still there, isn't he?" the other Lisa whispered. "In the mirror." She managed not to look for a full count of 10, then 20, then 30. When she finally checked, just once, the headlights behind her had vanished. No car, no pickup, just the empty ribbon of road, slick now with the first gentle spray of rain. Her lungs let out a breath she hadn't noticed she was holding. Her shoulders ached from tension. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, that's enough weird for one night." The CB stayed live. "I don't know which one of us made the right choices," the other Lisa said. Her voice was calmer now, resigned in a way that made Lisa's chest hurt. "Maybe there's just one long road and too many ways it can go wrong. But if you kept going, thank you. One of us needed to." Static rose, swallowing the words. Lisa reached slowly for the mic. She hesitated, then pressed the button anyway. "This is Ravenwing," she said, her voice low. "If you're out there, I heard you. I kept going. I hope you do too." She released the button and listened. No answer came. Only the gentle hiss of rain beginning to patter on the windshield, the small thrum of tires cutting through. The wet. An hour later, the storm broke fully, washing the night in sheets of silver. She pulled into a well-lit truck stop on the outskirts of a town, its lot crowded with rigs. The normal sounds of air brakes, laughter, and clinking dishes in the diner were a comfort she hadn't known she needed. Inside, near the coffee machines, an older driver in a faded cap was talking about strange CB skips during storms, how signals bounced in odd ways sometimes, how voices turned up from nowhere. "Had a guy once swear he heard himself on the radio," he said, chuckling. "Whole handle, same voice, the works, said it told him to slow down. Next day, big pileup right where he would have been if he hadn't. Brains play tricks out here. Road's good at that." Lisa poured her coffee, staring into the dark surface. In the glove box of her cab, her phone held a short, shaky audio file. Around mile 100, when the voice had first sounded like her, she had hit record, more as a strange experiment than anything. Later, back in the truck, curiosity finally pushed her to listen. The playback was faint, mostly static. Her own voice came through once or twice, sure, her side of the conversation, the few words she had said into the mic, but the rest was emptiness. No duplicate, no warnings, no desperate pleas. Near the very end of the recording, just before it cut off, something else whispered through. A bare thread of sound, almost too quiet to catch. It sounded like her, but older somehow, tired in a different way. "Next time," the voice murmured, "don't answer." Then only static. She sat there a long time, listening to nothing, while the rain tapped gently against the windows and the neon glow of the truck stop sign painted the inside of the cab in soft, comforting color. She didn't delete the file. She also didn't play it again. On runs through that stretch afterward, she always made sure her fuel and hours lined up so she didn't need Green Hollow. She would pass its sign at a steady clip, eyes locked on the road, the CB turned down low. Sometimes, through the washed-out hiss of distant conversations, she thought she heard a familiar voice asking if anyone was there. She never picked up the mic on those nights. Story number 3. Mark and Alina had always said the truck was their house, not their job. They were a team, married 10 years, on the road together for 7 of them. The rig was a long-nosed, slightly older model they bought second-hand and poured themselves into. New mattress in the sleeper, small TV mounted at the foot of the bunk, curtains Alina had sewn herself to make the narrow space feel less like a closet and more like a tiny bedroom that just happened to move at 65 miles an hour. They called the truck Old Star. It fit. The paint was a dull metallic blue, the chrome worn but cared for. Under the hood, the engine ran strong and steady, a low, deep rumble that both of them had learned to fall asleep to. The odometer, however, told a different story. 990,000 miles, the numbers read, the row of digits nearly full. "Lot of life in her yet," the seller had said, patting the side of the cab in that way people did when talking about something that had outlasted expectations. Previous owner kept her real clean, drove mostly nights, never missed a schedule. Mark sometimes wondered about that previous owner. There were faint signs of another life tucked into the corners of the cab. A tiny screw hole where a photo frame had once been, a worn spot on the steering wheel from someone's preferred grip, a faint, smoky scent buried deep in the upholstery that nothing seemed to fully remove. He didn't think much about it, though, until the first time the miles didn't add up. They were halfway through a cross-country haul, a run they'd done enough times to know the rhythm by heart. Mark drove the day shift. Alina took the night. They traded places like clockwork, each slipping into the bunk while the other settled into the seat, the highway unspooling in front of them in a familiar pattern of rest areas, way stations, and the glow of distant towns. On that particular night, the sky was clear and the route was straight. They were cutting across flat country where the horizon looked like someone had drawn a hard line between land and sky. Mark pulled into a truck stop just before dusk, logged his hours, and slid out from behind the wheel. "You're set," he told her, stretching. "Fuel's topped pre-trip, done. Just keep it between the lines. Wake me if you get bored." Alina grinned, taking his place and adjusting the seat forward. "You say that like you ever actually wake up." He didn't, usually. The hum of the engine and the soft motion of the cab worked better on him than any lullaby. That night was no different. He stretched out in the sleeper, pulled the curtain halfway closed, and let the familiar vibration of the road ease him down into sleep. When he woke again, it was full daylight. The cab was quiet. No music, no radio chatter. The engine idled in that soft, uneven way it did when the truck was in neutral. For a moment he thought they must be parked somewhere, a rest area maybe, or a customer's lot. Then he felt the slight, constant sway and realized they were still moving. He shoved the curtain aside. Alina wasn't in the driver's seat. His heart lurched. The wheel was steady, the line of the road straight ahead, the horizon hazy with late morning light. The truck moved calmly in its lane, cruise control engaged. There was no one behind the wheel. He snapped fully awake, surging forward, hands reaching out. But by the time he gripped the back of the seat, Alina stepped back into view from the passenger side, a styrofoam coffee cup in each hand. "Easy," she said, eyes widening at his expression. "You're okay. I just switched out of the seat. Needed to grab these before we hit the next stretch. What's wrong?" His breath rushed out in a shaky exhale. He looked down. Her seat was pulled back slightly. The cruise was still on. It made sense. For a few seconds he'd simply caught the truck between moments. That was all. "Thought we were driverless," he muttered, trying to laugh it off. "How long did I sleep?" Alina passed him a coffee. "All night. You were really out. Good thing. We made great time." He glanced at the dashboard clock. 10:33 a.m., then his eyes shifted to the odometer. They had covered nearly 700 miles since he'd closed his eyes. He frowned. That can't be right. "Why?" Alina took a sip, watching the road. Traffic was light. Barely saw another truck after midnight. There was a tailwind most of the time, too. He did the math in his head. 700 miles in a single night shift meant she'd held a speed much higher than they normally ran. Even on the straightest stretches, it wasn't like her. Alina was cautious. More likely to lose a half hour to a slow zone than risk a chance encounter with a hidden trooper. "You sure you didn't push it a little?" he asked. She gave him a look. "You know me better than that. Why?" He almost said it. Almost told her that the last thing he remembered before sleep was the truck stop at mile marker 142, and the first thing he saw when he woke was a sign for mile marker 823. Almost confessed that his legs still felt stiff in the way they only did after sitting in the driver's seat for a long time, not lying in the bunk. Instead, he shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Good time's good time." They changed shifts again that afternoon, then again the next day. The oddness of that morning receded into the background of his mind, filed under road weirdness, a big, untidy drawer where a lot of things ended up. It wasn't until the third incident that he stopped being able to ignore it. They were both awake when it happened, parked at a busy truck stop just outside a major city. The lot was packed, rows of rigs pulled close together, headlights winking on and off as drivers came and went. They had snagged one of the last available spots near the back fence, wedged between a reefer that hummed steadily and a flatbed loaded with construction equipment. "Showers," Alina declared, turning off the engine. "Real ones with water pressure." Mark laughed. "Now you're just bragging." He grabbed his bag from the bunk. "Want me to lock up?" "Yeah, I'll grab the logbook. Need to catch it up." He clicked the key fob. The familiar thunk of the lock sounded in the quiet cab. Together, they climbed down and walked side by side toward the building, weaving between idling trucks and the pools of light cast by tall lamps. They took their time. Hot water felt like a luxury, and both of them lingered under it until their fingers wrinkled. When they finally came back out to the lot, steam still rising from their hair, the sun had fully slipped below the horizon. Lights glowed in a scattered grid across the expanse of asphalt. For a moment, Mark couldn't spot Old Star. Then he did. Their truck was parked 3 rows closer to the entrance than where they'd left it. He stopped walking. Wait. Elena nearly bumped into him. What? He pointed. We were back there near the fence. She frowned, following his line of sight. The reefer and flatbed were still in their spots. A different truck now sat where Old Star had been, engine off, curtains drawn. Their rig, unmistakable in its dull blue paint and crooked mirror on the passenger side, occupied a neatly centered slot under a bright lamp. You moved it, she asked. No, his voice felt thin. Did you? Both sets of keys were in his pocket. He dropped his bag and dug them out, the metal cold in his palm. Maybe we're mixing up the rows, Elena offered, but her tone lacked conviction. They walked the route they remembered taking from the truck to the building, past the humming reefer, past the flatbed with its straps humming in the slight wind, past the faded number painted near the asphalt's edge. The space they had left earlier was labeled 47. Their truck now sat in 23. Someone's messing with us, Elena said. Has to be. Who? Mark looked around. No one paid them any mind. Drivers moved in easy, tired rhythms, climbing down from cabs, stretching, heading toward the lights and warmth and food. No one was looking at them. Inside the cab, everything was as they'd left it. Their bags were gone because they'd taken them. The logbook still lay open on the dash where Elena had put it. The engine key sat in the cup holder. But someone or something had moved 40,000 pounds of truck and trailer across the lot without making any noise either of them had noticed, and without a key. That night Mark couldn't sleep. He lay in the bunk with his eyes open, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine and the muffled sounds of the lot. After a long while, he slid forward, careful not to disturb Elena, who'd finally dozed off in the driver's seat with her feet propped on the dash. There on the floor by the pedals lay a small object he didn't recognize. He picked it up. It was an old-fashioned metal logbook ruler, the kind some drivers used to draw straight lines across paper logs. Its edges were smooth from use, the numbers nearly faded. 2 initials were scratched into one side, JH. He turned it over in his hands. They hadn't been given any extra gear with the truck when they'd bought it. No leftover tools, no personal items. Someone had used this ruler a lot, though, long enough to make the surface dull under constant touch. When he looked up again, the odometer caught his eye. 991,312 miles. He had written the number down just that afternoon when checking maintenance logs. It was higher now than it should have been, by almost 200 miles. They hadn't left the lot. The next evening, at another stop, he asked the old-timer in the booth about the previous owner. Blue Longnose Old Star, the man mused, squinting. Yeah, I remember that one. Belonged to a guy named Jack. Jack Heller, I think. Quiet, always ran nights. Never saw him in daylight much. What happened to him? Mark asked. The attendant hesitated. He didn't wake up on a run. Heart, they said. They found the truck parked on a wide shoulder, flashers on, logbook open on the seat. He just finished writing his hours when it happened. He tapped the counter with a slow, thoughtful rhythm. Funny thing was, he added, according to the Times, he'd have had to be in 2 places at once to make the miles he logged. Company chalked it up to bad paperwork. Happens more than you'd think. Back at the truck, Mark recounted what he'd heard. Elena listened in silence, her face unreadable. People die in trucks, she said eventually. It happens doesn't mean anything. He wanted to agree. He really did. 2 nights later, they decided to test a theory. They set a camera on the dash, pointed inward, recording both the driver's seat and the bunk. Another camera, a cheap dash cam they picked up months ago, pointed outward through the windshield. Mark checked the time on his phone, then on the dashboard clock, making sure they matched. "We'll both stay in the sleeper," Alina said. "At least for a while. If the truck moves," she didn't finish. "Then we know," he said. They took turns lying awake, listening. Sometime deep in the night, when the highway hum had smoothed into a white noise that made thoughts slippery, Mark realized he'd drifted. His eyes snapped open. The motion under them felt different, steadier, more insistent. The engine's pitch was just slightly higher. He pulled the curtain back. The driver's seat was occupied. For an instant, the sight didn't make sense. The shape in the seat was wrong for Alina, broader shoulders, cap pulled low, not detailed. Just a darker outline against the faint glow of the dash. Before his eyes could grab specifics, a wave of drowsiness slammed back into him, doubling the weight of his eyelids. He blinked hard. The seat was empty. The wheel was straight. The cruise control light glowed green. Beside him, Alina stirred, mumbling something about mile markers. The next morning, he pulled the footage from the cameras. The inward-facing one showed exactly what he remembered setting up. The empty driver's seat, the half-closed curtain, the vague tangle of blankets in the bunk. For hours, nothing changed. At 3:13 a.m., the frame juddered slightly as if the camera had been tapped. For the next 2 hours, the faint pulsing of passing highway lights played across the dash. The driver's seat remained empty. On the outward dash cam, the world rolled by in a grainy tunnel of darkness and reflective stripes. At 3:13 a.m., the truck signaled and changed lanes smoothly, moving around a slower vehicle. No one's hands were visible on the wheel. About 10 seconds later, in the reflection on the windshield from the GPS screen, something flickered. A shape almost like a head turning, a brim of a cap, then nothing. Alina watched it with him, both of them silent. "Maybe it's a glitch," she said eventually. "Camera artifact." "Maybe," he said. The miles kept accruing. They tried different things, leaving the key on the dash, turning off cruise control, staying awake in shifts, each one watching the other. No matter what they did, if both of them dozed, even for a moment, the odometer would jump further than seemed possible for the time that had passed. Once, on a badly lit stretch of 2-lane where the wind shoved the trailer around like a toy, Alina's eyelids fluttered closed for what felt like a blink. When she jerked them open again, they were cresting a hill they shouldn't have reached for another 15 minutes. "Mile marker 51, Mark said quietly, looking at the sign as it slid past. "Last I remember, we were at 39. She checked the clock. 2 minutes had passed. They stopped trying to explain it after the mountain pass. Snow had moved in earlier than forecast. Heavy, wet flakes turned the world into a narrow gray tunnel. The CB buzzed with chatter. Chains required ahead, a spun-out rig blocking most of the right lane, troopers waving people onto a slower detour. They were already behind schedule. The load was time-sensitive enough that the penalty for missing the window would eat half the profit on the run. They should have pulled off before the climb, waited it out, but the thought of another missed bonus weighed on both of them. "We'll take it slow," Alina said. "We've done worse." The grade was steep. The road twisted in long, sweeping curves that could be elegant on a clear day but felt treacherous now. Snow thickened, wipers struggling to keep up. The sign's warning of runaway ramps took on a heavier meaning. Mark watched her knuckles whiten on the wheel. "We can switch," he said. "I'm awake enough." She shook her head, jaw clenched. "I've got it." He must have dozed, though. The rhythm of the turns, the hypnotic sweep of the wipers, the low murmur of snow against the windshield. They dragged him under almost without warning. When he woke, the truck was parked on level ground. Sunlight pressed against the curtains, thin but bright. The engine idled low, the comforting sound of a vehicle that had survived a hard night. His heart thudded as memory scrambled to catch up. "Elena," he called. She answered from the driver's seat, voice hoarse. "You up?" He pushed the curtain aside. They were in a large gravel lot at the base of the mountain, just beyond the last downgrade warning sign. Other trucks sat around them, some chained up, some not. A gas station and small cafe stood nearby, their roofs loaded with snow. "What happened?" he asked. She didn't look back at him. Her hands rested limply on her knees. "I remember the second switchback," she said slowly. "The trailer slid a little. You were sleeping. I told myself I'd pull off at the turnout after the next curve. I don't remember the next curve." He stared at the odometer. They had traveled exactly the distance from the start of the pass to this lot. Not a mile more, not a mile less. On the outward dash cam, the footage showed snow and darkness, headlights tunneling through the storm. The truck's engine roared uphill, then eased as they crested the summit. The road dropped away on either side. At one point, the camera caught a blurred shape in the mirror, a man's face just for a heartbeat where no one should have been. Eyes forward, jaw set. The paper log open on the dash showed neat lines in blue ink. Start of shift, route, weather conditions, estimated arrival. The handwriting was neither Mark's nor Elena. At the bottom of the page, under the last entry, a short note had been added in the same unfamiliar script. "Graveyard's covered, you two just sleep." Elena closed the book slowly. They didn't talk about selling the truck that day. Not then. They drove the rest of the run in an uneasy truce with something neither of them could name. The schedule, for the first time in months, was met with ease. Weeks later, after a different run and a different storm, they sat in a bright office at a dealership, signing papers. "You sure you want to trade her in?" the salesman asked. "Good engine in that one, still got miles to give." Mark looked through the glass at Old Star, parked neatly at the edge of the lot. Sunlight glanced off the windshield, hiding the interior from view. "We're sure," he said. They left a note in the glove compartment, taped where it couldn't be missed. "If you run nights," it read in Elena's careful print, "you're not alone. There's a third driver who doesn't clock out. Don't fight him. Don't watch too closely. And if you ever wake up parked safe when you shouldn't be, remember to say thank you." They folded the glove box shut. On the highway months later, in a different truck with a lower odometer and a newer smell, Mark sometimes caught a glimpse of a familiar blue cab in the opposite lane, lights cutting through the dark. For a moment, he'd see the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat, broad-shouldered, cap pulled low, before the other rig disappeared into the tapestry of the night. He never turned his head to stare, neither did Elena. Some habits once learned on the road were better not broken. Story number 4. Cole never trusted anything that drove itself. He'd been on the road long enough to remember when power windows felt fancy. The idea of a truck that could steer, brake, and decide what was safe without the person in the seat sounded less like progress and more like tempting fate. But freight changed, companies changed, and one Monday afternoon, dispatch handed him a new set of keys with a grin. "Congratulations," the dispatcher said. "You just got upgraded. Brand new tractor. Full assist, lane keeping, adaptive cruise, collision avoidance, the works. This thing practically babysits you." Cole turned the key fob over in his hand. It had weight, slick and modern, unlike the simple metal keys he was used to. "Does it still need me?" he asked. "Or is that optional now?" The dispatcher laughed. "Somebody's gotta sit in it so the customers feel better. Relax. You'll love it after your first mountain pass." The new truck gleamed in the late sun, white paint unmarred by bugs or dust yet, company logo crisp on the doors. Inside, the cab smelled of new plastic and upholstery instead of diesel and coffee. Screens glowed where simple dials would have been on his old rig. A slim, dark camera lens watched from above the steering wheel, ready to monitor his face for signs of fatigue. Cole settled into the seat with a stiffness that had nothing to do with his back. The dash screen came alive, showing a stylized view of the highway, little icons for cars and trucks around him, lines for lanes. A friendly female voice announced itself. "Driver assist system online. Good evening, Cole." He frowned. "How do you know my name?" "Linked to your driver ID," the voice chirped. "Would you like me to walk you through available safety features?" "No, thanks," he muttered. "I'll figure it out." At first, the technology was mostly a nuisance. The lane keeping tugged gently at the wheel if he drifted close to a line. The adaptive cruise eased off when a car in front of him cut in two sharply. Each beep and vibration felt like a tap on the shoulder from an overcautious passenger. But a few nights in, somewhere flat and featureless, he let the system run for 10 minutes as a test. The truck stayed centered, smoothed his minor corrections, even slowed slightly for a shallow curve. "It's just a tool," he told himself, watching the road. "Like cruise control, like air brakes, you're still in charge." He didn't fully believe it, but the miles slid by. The new truck earned his reluctant respect. Until the mountain run. The route took him west, toward a range of dark hills that became true mountains under the cover of night. His load was light, pallets of packaged goods, nothing that would shove him downhill if the brakes heated. The forecast called for clear skies, cold but dry. Good conditions. The screen on the dash glowed softly, showing his position on a digital map. The main interstate arched ahead like a silver ribbon. Off to the side, thinner lines marked county roads and old routes, half faded. As he approached the foothills, his phone chimed with a text that had already synced into the truck system. The message flashed on the screen, neat and official. "Route alert. Rockslide ahead I-70 mm 214 222. Expect closure. SUGGESTED detour available. Tap to accept." Cole frowned. He'd heard nothing on the CB, but that didn't mean much. He tapped. A new line traced itself on the map. A pale blue vein veering off the interstate before the marked closure, threading through the mountains on a smaller road, then rejoining the main route 20 miles further along. "Suggested detour approved," the truck's voice said. "Estimated additional time, 11 minutes. He checked the printed directions he'd been given that morning. No mention of alternate routes, but closures happened. Slides were real. He'd seen pictures of boulders the size of small houses sitting in the middle of lanes. "CB'll squawk about it soon enough," he murmured. The next overhead sign confirmed the closure. "Interstate closed ahead at mile 214. Use Alt ROUTES." Arrow boards blinked amber in the distance. "All right," he said to no one. "Let's see your fancy detour." He signaled and took the exit the system highlighted. The ramp curved away from the steady stream of truck lights. Within moments, he was almost alone, the rest of the night traffic continuing up the main line toward the closure. The detour road was older, narrower. Its reflectors were spaced farther apart. The guardrails here were scuffed and rusted instead of bright. Trees pressed closer to the shoulder, black shapes against the darker sky. "Entering secondary route," the truck announced. "Lane keeping limited. Please remain alert." "Wasn't planning on a nap," Cole muttered. They climbed in a long, slow grade. The moon slipped in and out behind thin clouds. Once in a while, the road curved hard enough that he had to ease off the throttle and feel the trailer pull slightly, but it was manageable. Then quietly, the system did something it hadn't done before. The display zoomed out on its own, then back in. Ahead of his stylized truck icon, another ghostly shape appeared, an outline of a vehicle, faint and gray, traveling the same route perhaps half a mile in front. Maintaining safe following distance, the voice said calmly. Cole stiffened. Following who? He asked. No answer came. The ghost truck icon glided along the line of the road, its position ticking forward on the map. He looked out at the real highway ahead, peering into the night. No taillights, no reflectors bouncing from another vehicle's rear. He flipped to the CB. Westbound on this detour, anyone up ahead of me? He asked. Got a white tractor, light load, just cleared the foothill ramp. Don't see your lights, friend. Static and a distant, garbled voice answered, talking about something else entirely. No one mentioned the detour. He checked the time, midnight straight. His stomach rolled a little as if on a slow wave. Maybe he was more tired than he thought. The truck handled the next curve almost eagerly, easing into it with a subtle assist at the wheel. Cole felt it, that faint pressure, like another set of hands lightly touching his own, guiding. I've got it, he grumbled, nudging back. The wheel's subtle resistance faded. More miles, more darkness. The elevation climbed, his ears popped. The map showed them threading along a ridge now, one side of the road dropping off into nothingness. Use caution, the voice suggested pleasantly. Steep grade ahead. The ghost vehicle icon slowed a fraction. So did his truck, the adaptive cruise responding to a vehicle that wasn't actually visible. Cole rubbed at the back of his neck. System, he said, feeling ridiculous for speaking to it. What vehicle are you tracking ahead of me? Following distance, 400 meters, the voice replied. Driver status unavailable. He looked at the dash more closely. Below his own name on the screen, Cole M, active. Another, smaller line flickered briefly, half glitched, as if trying to appear. JP, driver assist recording. The letters scrambled before he could read the whole name. The line vanished. His heartbeat picked up in his throat. Just up ahead on the real road, a weathered green sign emerged from the dark. Old Ridge Pass, Alt 17. Cole's hands tightened. He knew that name. Old Ridge wasn't on most routes anymore. The new interstate cut through the rock with smooth tunnels and broad, well-banked curves. Old Ridge was from another time. Tight hairpins, minimal shoulders, a reputation for taking the inattentive down the mountain faster than they wanted to go. He eased off the throttle. We're not doing this, he said quietly. We're turning around. The map disagreed. The light blue detour line curled deeper into Old Ridge, reconnecting with the interstate only after several miles of squiggles. The ghost truck icon floated along, unconcerned. As the lane narrowed further, faint yellow chevrons marked a hard curve coming up. The drop beyond the guardrail was now a pure absence, a suggestion of depth, a darkness deeper than the sky. Approaching curve, the system said. Suggested speed 30 miles per hour. He was already down to 25. The wheel twitched gently under his palms, like a horse testing its bit. Lane assist activated. No, it isn't, he said, and thumbed the assist button on the wheel. Watching the little lane icon go dark. The wheel went light for a breath. Then, impossibly, it nudged again, firmer this time, trying to bring him closer to the center of the lane as the road bent. All at once, the cab felt smaller. Cole snapped the cruise control off with a jab. You're done, he growled. I'm driving. For a moment, everything obeyed. The truck responded solely to his inputs, muscle memory and long experience taking over. The curve unwound. The trailer followed. Then the screen on the dash flickered. The map shuddered, momentarily replaced by static. When it cleared, the view ahead looked different, zoomed in, sharper. The ghost truck ahead was now highlighted in pale red. A soft tone chimed. Replaying recorded route, the system said. The friendly lilt was gone, flattened into something almost mechanical. Following safety profile, Pike jarred E. Cole froze. He'd heard that name before, years back in a driver's lounge somewhere. A driver who'd gone over Old Ridge on a snowy night. a story traded in low voices. Over coffee, the details had blurred, but the ending hadn't. "Not tonight," Cole whispered. The truck surged slightly as the engine brake eased without his command, letting them roll a hair faster into the next bend. He gripped the wheel hard, muscles straining. "Driver input conflict detected," the system announced. "Assistance required." "I don't need your help," he snapped. "Disengage, all of you, now." Silence answered. The next right-hand curve loomed, sharper than the last, guardrail hugging the outside edge. The headlights painted its silver metal, beyond it nothing but depth. Cole made a choice. At the last instant before the turn, he twisted the key in the ignition to off. Every sound in the cab changed at once. The hum of the engine died. The power steering assist went heavy in his hands. The screen snapped to black, taking the ghost truck and the pale blue line with them. The only things left were the whisper of tires on asphalt and the rushing of his own pulse in his ears. Without power, the wheel fought him like solid stone. The weight of the rig pushed forward, insisting on its own path. The downhill angle tugged them outward, gravity eager. For one terrifying moment, he felt something else layered over his grip, a pressure that wasn't his, as if invisible hands were still trying to steer, following some remembered trajectory. He leaned into it with everything he had, shoulders burning. The guardrail swept closer in the headlights, then slid away as he wrestled the nose of the truck into the center of the lane. The trailer tugged, then settled. The curve passed. They coasted in eerie quiet, the cab lit only by the pale spill of the headlamps and the faint glow from his darkened phone screen in the cradle. No voice spoke. No icons blinked. For the first time in miles, Cole felt alone in the truck. He waited until the grade eased and the road straightened, then turned the key back to ON. The engine cranked, coughed once, and caught, shuddering back to life. The dash came alive in stages, gauges, then the central screen, then the map. The detour line was gone. So was the ghost truck. The display showed him on an entirely different road than before, one that sloped gently down toward a cluster of lights marking a small town, and beyond it, the ribbon of the main interstate. "No data connection," the system said calmly. "Recalculating, please wait." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd trapped. "Yeah," he said hoarsely, "you do that." He found a wide pullout just before the town and eased the rig onto the gravel, setting the brakes. For a long minute, he sat with his hands still on the wheel, feeling the ghost of that earlier resistance in his muscles. Finally, he killed the engine properly and climbed down. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. The mountains stood silent around him, their outlines faint against the sky. Somewhere far below, the interstate murmured, a soft, distant roar. He walked once around the truck, boots crunching on gravel. The guardrails along this stretch were newer, unmarred. The sign at the edge of the pullout read, RIDGVIW Overlook, elevation 7,214. No mention of Old Ridge, no warning about detours. Back inside, he pulled the driver assist settings menu up on the dash. The list of saved driver profiles scrolled by company default, training mode, then halfway down a name. Pike JRDE status, ARCHIVD. His finger hovered over it. He pressed. The profile details opened. Driver height, seat preferences following distance tolerance. Last recorded trip, Alt 17, Ridge Pass, incomplete. A small, blinking line of text at the bottom read, Continue SAVED route. He selected No. A prompt appeared, Delete record. For a long moment, he stared at that question. In the end, he backed out without deleting anything. On future runs, whenever dispatch tried to assign him that same detour, he refused. Road open, they'd say. Sensors show it's fine. Find someone else, he'd answer. I'm not driving your ghost's route. Most of them laughed it off. One older dispatcher, hearing the name Pike, just nodded slowly and changed the plan without comment. Once, at a truck stop cafe, Cole overheard two younger drivers talking about the new trucks. "Best part is they learn from previous runs," one said. "You get in, hit replay safest route, and it'll copy some other guy's perfect pass. Takes half the thinking out of it." "If his pass was so perfect," Cole said quietly, unable to stop himself, "he'd still be here to drive it." They looked at him, puzzled. He finished his coffee and left before they could ask more. At night, climbing lesser grades in a different rig that trusted him to steer, he sometimes thought of that faint gray icon ahead of him on the map. A truck that existed only in lines of code and sensor ghosts, forever caught at the point where one bad turn had ended a life. He never used the full driver assist again. Cruise control, sure. A mild beep if he drifted near a line, maybe. But when the road narrowed and the drop-offs deepened, his hands stayed firm on the wheel, the way they always had. And if, now and then, he felt the slightest tug against his grip, like someone else somewhere, still trying to finish a route they'd started long ago, he just tightened his hold and kept to the center of the lane. The mountain, he knew, remembered everything. So did the machines. Story number 5. Eddie Santos preferred simple loads. Give him paper rolls, canned food, palletized anything. No tankers, no hazmat, nothing that needed him to memorize extra placards or emergency procedures. The road could be complicated enough by itself. His cargo didn't need to add mystery. But that month, the bills were ugly and the miles had been thin. When his dispatcher called with an offer for a special run that paid almost double the usual rate, he listened. "You'll pick up at the side lot," the dispatcher said over the phone. "Not the usual dock, trailers preloaded, you just hook and go." "That's it?" Eddie asked. A pause, mostly. "There are 3 conditions." Eddie leaned back in his chair at home, staring at the yellowed ceiling. Extra pay always came with fine print. "Let's hear them." "First," the dispatcher said, "you run it overnight, entirely at night. No driving this load in broad daylight." "Why?" "Customer request. Sensitive equipment doesn't like the heat." Eddie frowned. He'd hauled temperature-sensitive freight before, but it always came with a refrigerated unit, sensors, paperwork. This sounded more like a superstition than a specification. "Second," the dispatcher continued, "no unscheduled stops. If you have to take your 10, you do it at the drop. Fuel up first. Once you roll with it, you don't park until you're there." "That's not how hours work," Eddie said dryly. "You'll have enough time. It's a straight shot if you leave late. Don't worry about it." "And the third condition." The dispatcher hesitated longer this time. "You don't open the trailer doors," he said finally. "Customer's strict on that. Seal goes on at pickup, stays on until they break it." Eddie sat with that for a moment. "I'm not customs," he said. "What's back there?" "It's not illegal," the dispatcher said quickly. "Not that kind of job, just a specialized contract. We've run it with other drivers before. No problems." "How many turned it down?" Eddie asked. "Enough that I'm calling my dependable guy," the dispatcher replied. "It's good money, Eddie. You're always saying you need a break." He could have refused. He knew that. But the late fees on his mortgage didn't care what felt comfortable. "Fine," he said. "Send the details." Pickup was set for 11 that night at the far edge of their yard, near an older chain-link fence that separated company property from an empty, weeded lot. When Eddie pulled in, the main docks were bustling, forklifts whining, voices calling, safety vests flashing in and out of light. Out in the side lot, it was much quieter. The trailer waited alone in a dark corner. It was plain white, no markings, no company logo. The reflective tape along its sides looked newer than the trailer itself, fresh and bright against the slightly dull metal. A small sticker near the nose read, "Property of GRAYSON Logistics." He didn't know that name. As he backed under the kingpin and felt the satisfying clunk of it locking in, a yard worker approached, a man in his 50s with sun-browned skin and a cap pulled low. His name patch said Ron. "You're the one taking this?" Ron asked. "Yeah," Eddie said. "Special run, right?" Ron glanced at the trailer, then back at him. "You got the instructions. No daytime, no stops, no opening the doors." Ron nodded slowly. "Then that's what you do." "Come on," Eddie said lightly, trying to cut the tension. "What's in it? Top secret soda, air conditioners with stage fright." Ron didn't smile. "Doesn't matter what's in it, you just take it where it's going, that's the deal." Under the security light, Eddie saw something on the rear doors he hadn't noticed before. Near the handle, 3 small, faint lines were scratched into the paint, like someone had dragged a key or a screwdriver there. They were short, side by side, not deep enough to matter, but deliberate. "Someone tried to get cute," Eddie said. Ron followed his gaze. The corner of his mouth tightened. "Folks get curious," he said. "That's the problem." He held up a numbered seal still looped in plastic. "This goes on. You don't cut it off. Customer checks it at the other end. That way everyone's happy." Eddie nodded. "How many times you done this run?" he asked as Ron threaded the seal through the latch. "Me," Ron said. "I just hook what they tell me, but I remember this trailer. It's been in and out a few times now." He snapped the seal shut with a clean, final click. "You be careful, Santos." The way he said it made Eddie want to ask more. Instead, he climbed into the cab. By the time he eased out of the yard and onto the highway, the sky was already dark, the last blue washed away. The route on his GPS traced a mostly straight path southwest through desert country, only a handful of small towns dotting the way. The drop was a facility outside a place he'd never heard of, marked only as GRAYSON Site 3 on his directions. The truck felt heavy. The manifest said the load weighed just under 12,000 pounds, a light haul, barely noticeable behind a tractor this size. But as he accelerated onto the interstate, the engine strained like it was pulling much more. The trailer creaked once, a low, settling sound that carried through the frame. "Maybe the brakes are dragging," he muttered, checking his mirrors. The shiny white rectangle sat square behind him, lights glowing clean along the edges, nothing out of place. A faint dusting of dirt on the undercarriage suggested it had seen some miles. He drove. Out beyond the city lights, the world flattened. The desert spread in all directions, its features reduced to darker lumps against the slightly less dark sky. Stars pricked through, bright and distant. The road became an arrow stretching ahead into nothing. He kept his speed a few ticks under the limit, eyes flicking between the gauges and the far edge of the headlight's reach. The CB was quiet tonight, just the occasional murmur of far-off voices and a country song someone was piping through from miles away. Hours passed. The trailer's weight grew strange. Sometimes, hitting a small rise, the truck would respond sluggishly, like it was truly carrying a full load near its maximum. Other times, cresting a similar grade, the tractor almost leapt forward, too light, as if the trailer were suddenly nearly empty. He checked the wind, the incline, anything that might explain it. Nothing did. At the state line, a weigh station sign blinked to life. "Open, all trucks must enter." Eddie sighed and flipped on his turn signal. The last thing he wanted was to be pulled around back and have some inspector decide his paperwork didn't look right. But the penalty for bypassing an open scale wasn't worth the risk. The ramp arced gently in. A few rigs idled in the staging area, but the short pre-scale lane stood clear. He rolled onto the platform at a creeping pace, the big sign ahead changing from weight to scale in use. The digital weight display blinked to life. For a second, it was nothing but zeros. Then it jumped. Gross, 62,418. That wasn't right. With his empty weight and a 12,000-pound load, He should have been in the low 50s tops. He checked his mirrors, still only his own reflection. No other truck coupled to him by mistake. No forklift hanging off the back. Must be a bad scale, he said under his breath. The red light above the lane flicked to green. Proceed, the sign read. He eased off. As his front axle rolled off the platform, the numbers on the display flickered again. Gross 52,006. He stared in disbelief. His trailer axles were still on the scale. The whole rig should have weighed in together. Instead, as each set of wheels left the platform, the numbers changed as if the weight of whatever sat in the trailer shifted forward, backward, then briefly vanished. In his mirror, for just a second as his back tires left the steel, he thought he saw the trailer bounce, just slightly, as if something inside had moved. The weigh station officer, visible through the glass window of his booth, didn't react. He looked bored, sipping from a mug, eyes on a screen Eddie couldn't see. Eddie considered pulling around back, asking for a reweigh, but the memory of Ron's face under the yard lights held him. Don't open the doors. He kept rolling. Past midnight, the highway grew emptier. The occasional oncoming truck passed, a bright rush, then was gone. The hum of tires on asphalt and the steady thrum of the engine wrapped around him like a blanket. Somewhere around mile marker 172, he heard the first sound. A soft, irregular thump from behind him, not the rhythmic slap of a loose strap or the squeak of worn springs. This was different, 3 taps, spaced unevenly like knuckles rapping on a wall. Tap, tap, tap. He turned off the radio. Silence except for the truck. Then after a minute, tap, tap. He scanned the mirrors again. The trailer remained closed, the seal number glinting faintly when his side lights caught it. No flapping metal, no swinging mud flaps. No reason for a noise that sounded so uncomfortably deliberate. He tried to tell himself it was just cargo settling. Even light freight could shift a little over time. Maybe whoever loaded it had strapped it as tight as they should have. Another series of knocks, closer together now. Tap, tap, tap. It made the tiny hairs on his arms stand up. You're tired, he said to himself quietly. You're primed to hear every little noise, that's all. Around 2 in the morning, he pulled into a fuel station. His one allowed stop, he reasoned. The instructions had said no unscheduled stops. Fuel was scheduled. He needed enough to make it to the drop anyway. The station was one of those lonely desert islands of light and concrete, its pumps glowing under a canopy, the store windows bright but empty. A single car sat near the side, dark and still. Farther down, a refrigerated trailer's cooling unit buzzed softly. Eddie parked at the truck island closest to the road and killed the engine. The sudden quiet rang in his ears. As he started the pump, he glanced back at the trailer. The seal was intact. The scratches near the handle seemed a little deeper in this light, but that could have been his imagination. The night air felt cooler near the trailer than by the cab. A faint, almost metallic smell drifted from the rear, like the air inside had been shut away for a long time. Don't be stupid, he told himself. He topped the tanks, grabbed a coffee from inside the store, and headed back. As he climbed into the cab, a movement in the corner of his eye caught his attention. An older truck, paint faded, was parked 2 spaces over, nose pointing toward the exit. In the glow from the station lights, he could just make out the man sitting in the driver's seat. Thin, white-haired, hands wrapped around the wheel like he was holding on against a strong wind. The man was watching him. Eddie buckled in and set his coffee in the holder. The man in the other truck tapped his horn once, just enough to be noticed. Eddie hesitated, then cranked his window down. Yeah. You running that white box? The man called, voice rough but clear. Eddie glanced back. Yeah, why? The man looked past him, his gaze fixed on the trailer. His face had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in sun and wind. There were deep lines at the corners of his eyes, and something else there too, something like recognition. "What's the seal number?" he asked. Eddie frowned. "Why does it matter?" "Humor an old man," the driver said. "Seal number." Reluctantly, Eddie leaned out and squinted at the small printed digits. 37419, he called. The old man's jaw tightened. "Last run I ever did," he said softly, more to himself than to Eddie, "was with that same number on the door." Eddie felt a thin ribbon of cold slip down his spine. "You sure?" The man nodded slowly. "Grayson job, same conditions I bet, night run, no stops, don't open the box." Eddie shifted in his seat. "You did it." "Almost," the man said. "Got about 3/4 of the way, then I made a mistake." He didn't look away from the trailer as he spoke. "There's a long stretch out there with no lights, no towns, just those little rumble strips on the shoulder to wake you up if you drift. I started hearing something from the back, tapping, like somebody trying not to make too much noise. Drove another hour, told myself it was straps or pallets." He swallowed once, Adam's apple bobbing. "Then I started hearing voices, real faint, like they were talking through a wall, couldn't make out the words, just the tone, some scared, some tired, one that kept saying a name over and over." The air in Eddie's cab felt very still. "I pulled onto the shoulder," the man went on, "even though I knew I wasn't supposed to. Thought about the money, thought about my logbook, thought about what happens if I call somebody and tell them I hear things. Then I climbed down and walked back." He paused. The buzzing of the station lights filled the space between them. "I didn't break the seal," he said. "I stood there with my hand on the latch and I didn't cut it, but I listened, put my ear to the door. They sounded closer, like they felt me there." "What did you do?" Eddie asked quietly. "I got back in and drove," the man said simply. "Finished the run. Guard at the gate checked the number, checked my ID, waved me in. They took the trailer behind a fence and told me to leave." He finally looked at Eddie full on. "When I got home, there was a voicemail from my brother," he said. "Left hours earlier. A bus went off the road that night out near the same mile marker I'd been by, full of workers. They were hauling them to a hospital farther down the line, but the ambulance company never made it to some of them. Weather closed in. Roads washed out. Folks talked about them for a while. Then they didn't." He took a breath. "I started checking dates," he said. "Routes. A year later, another call for a Grayson load, same instructions. I turned it down. Couple days after that, heard about a van that disappeared on a back road in that same stretch. They found it eventually, but not." He let the sentence trail off. "I don't know what's in that box," he finished. "Maybe it's nothing but electronics and my brain filled the dark with nonsense. But that seal number, I know I've seen it before, and I know I don't take those runs anymore." The fuel pump clicked once somewhere behind them as another truck finished. "Why tell me?" Eddie asked. The old man's eyes were tired. "Because I wish someone had warned me, even if I wouldn't have listened." Eddie glanced at the clock. If he stayed much longer, he'd start eating into his cushion. "I'm already hooked," he said slowly. "Dispatch expects that drop. I've got bills waiting. You telling me turn around and quit on it?" "I'm telling you to get it where it's going without playing with it," the man said. "Don't pull off to listen to noises. Don't talk back if you hear your name. Don't stop for anybody waving by that stretch. Just keep that wheel straight until you see the lights at the end." He started his engine, the low rumble rolling across the lot. "And if you get there," he added, "and they tell you they haven't been able to find a driver for that run in a while, don't correct them." He put his truck in gear and pulled away, his taillights shrinking quickly into the dark. Eddie sat there a moment longer, the old man's words circling in his head. Then he shook himself and started his own engine. "Stories," he said under his breath. "Lots full of stories." Back on the highway, the night seemed deeper. The desert on either side of the road felt attentive somehow, like a room full of people who'd stopped talking as someone walked in. The knock started up again, around mile marker 190. Tab, tab, tab. He turned the radio up slightly, not enough to drown them out completely, but enough to make them feel less like the only sound in the universe. A while later, the faintest trace of something else threaded through the cab. Not quite voices, more like the suggestion of them. He thought, absurdly, that it sounded like the murmur of passengers on a long ride. Too low to make out words, just the rise and fall of speech. He focused on the white lines, on the green signs counting down the distance, on the glow of his GPS tracing that unbroken path to GRAYSON Site 3. Just once, somewhere in the middle of that empty stretch, his headlights caught movement at the edge of the road. A figure stood by the shoulder, arm outstretched, thumb up in that old hitchhiker gesture. They were too far into the darkness to see clearly, just the outline of a person with something like a backpack at their feet. As Eddie's rig approached, the figure took a step closer to the lane, hand lifting as if to wave. He tightened his grip on the wheel and didn't slow. The knocks in the trailer spiked briefly, a rapid staccato like many hands at once. Tap, 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 tap. He kept going. In the mirror, the stretch of road where the figure had stood was empty. No small red glow of cigarettes, no moving shadow, just broken white lines receding into black. By the time the facility appeared, his shoulders ached with tension. GRAYSON Site 3 rose out of the desert like a cluster of low, square building blocks, surrounded by high fence and bright lights. A guard shack controlled the single entrance. As he rolled to a stop, the guard inside, a woman with a clipboard and a calm expression, stepped out. "Manifest?" she asked. He handed it over, watching her eyes scan the details. She checked the trailer number, the company name, the seal notation. Then she walked to the back of the rig. The knocks had stopped miles earlier. The silence back there now felt heavy. She bent, reading the small digits on the plastic loop. 37419, she called. Matches. Something in his chest loosened a notch. "Back into Dock 3, she said, returning to the cab. "They'll take it from there. You can park by the fence while they unload. Someone will bring you your paperwork when they're done." He rolled slowly toward the low building, following painted arrows. Dock 3's door stood open, the rectangle of shadow inside darker than the night. He backed the trailer carefully until he felt the soft kiss of the bumpers against the concrete. Red lights on either side of the dock flashed, then turned solid. He killed the engine and sat there, listening. No knocks, no voices, just the ping of cooling metal. A part of him wanted to climb down and stand by the door again, just to see, just to know what was inside once and for all. He stayed in the seat. After a while, he heard the faint echo of a forklift from inside the building, its beeping muted by the walls. No shouts, no crashes, just the normal sounds of freight being moved. 20 minutes later, a man in a reflective vest walked up to his cab with a clipboard. "Unload you quick," the man said when Eddie rolled the window down. "You're good to go." Eddie glanced at the empty trailer on the manifest copy the man handed back. Under contents, it listed, electrical equipment, non-HAZ. "Easy enough," Eddie said. "You're one of the few that make good time on this run," the man offered. "These trailers sit more than they move, far as I can tell." "Yeah," Eddie tried to keep his tone casual. "Heard you had a lot of drivers lining up to take it." The man snorted. "Not lately. Most of your side either refuse the route or don't get through without complications. You must have a strong constitution." Eddie thought of the old driver at the fuel station, of the scratches near the latch, of the different weights on the scale. "I just drive the truck," he said. On his way back through the yard, he passed the line of docks on the far side. Dock 7's overhead door was open just enough to see part of a white trailer inside, plain, unmarked. For a moment, as his headlights slid across it, the numbers on the rear flickered into view. They weren't his trailers, but the seal looped through the latch, glinting faintly, bore the same digits. 37,419. He blinked, and the number seemed to waver, as if heat were rising off it. Then the angle changed and the door frame hid it from view. He could have gone back to ask, to say, "Hey, how many times have you used that seal?" He didn't. Instead, he rolled through the gate, nodded to the guard, and let the desert night swallow his rig again. On later runs, when money was tight and dispatch dangled Grayson jobs in front of him, he always said no. "Pay good," they'd argue. "You already know the route." "Somebody else can have it," he'd reply. "Find someone who likes company." Because that was the part that stuck with him most in the quiet hours afterward. The sense, not of being watched exactly, but of not being the only one awake in that stretch of night. Every now and then, at a truck stop far from that route, he'd see a plain white trailer parked off by itself. No markings, fresh reflective tape. If he walked past and caught a glimpse of the seal number, his pulse would kick a little harder until he saw that it was different. And once, just once, when the wind was still and the lot was almost empty, he heard a soft tapping from somewhere in the maze of parked rigs. Tap, tap, tap. He turned his head. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He climbed into his truck, closed the door firmly, and drove on toward a load of paper rolls that didn't mind if he listened to the radio as loud as he wanted. Story number 6. Jonah Hale had been running long haul for 25 years, and in that time he'd learned a few personal rules about the road. Never skip your pre-trip, no matter how late you are. Don't cheap out on tires. Don't assume the GPS is smarter than a paper atlas. And if fog rolls in hard enough that the world shrinks to a circle of light in front of the bumper, find a safe place to wait it out. That last rule was the one he was about to break. He was pushing across 3 states on an overnight run, a refrigerated trailer humming steady behind him. The dispatch window was tight but doable as long as he kept moving. The load wasn't glamorous, frozen bread products, but the rate was good, and the company had hinted at a steady lane if he handled it well. The night had started clear. A wide black sky full of stars stretched above the interstate, the thin silver ribbon of road unwinding straight ahead. Then, around midnight, the air changed. First, it was just a low mist hugging the ditches. Then thin fingers of fog began reaching across the lanes in pale streaks. Within an hour, the world had turned into a soft, shifting tunnel. The beam of his headlights swallowed 100 feet out. He dropped his speed, sitting in the right lane, hazard lights off but thumb close to the switch. Other trucks moved around him now and then, their red dots sliding by and vanishing. "Should have stopped at that last plaza," he muttered, watching the dim glow of his fuel gauge. The needle hovered a hair above a quarter, enough to get where he was going but not enough to be picky. The GPS showed the next services almost 60 miles ahead, between him and that safe. Bright Oasis was nothing but blacktop, fog, and a handful of exits that led to towns too small to bother mapping in detail. A green sign loomed out of the mist on the right. KTTLFORD, exit 31, food, fuel, lodging. Jonah frowned. He knew this route, had been up and down it for years. Kettleford didn't ring any bells. Neither did exit 31. The numbers in his memory jumped from 28 to 34 with nothing of note between. He glanced at his dash-mounted GPS. No icon appeared for a town, no forked road, no mention of services. The screen kept the interstate as a single, straight line, insisting there was nothing there. Out the windshield, the sign slid past, undeniable and solid. He could almost feel the truck's thirst. "Probably just a new build," he said under his breath. "GPS isn't updated." He signaled and took the exit. The ramp curved gently down, the fog thickening as he left the higher, windswept main line. Ahead, a second sign emerged, smaller and older looking. KETTLEFORD Depot, Trucks Welcome 1. MI. The access road was narrow, 2 lanes with no shoulder, flanked by dark fields and skeletal trees. The fog here felt heavier, clinging to the windshield in slow, wet swirls. His wipers clicked back and forth, pushing it away. A faint glow grew in the distance, resolving gradually into a cluster of lights. As he drew nearer, shapes took form. A tall, vintage-looking sign with a cracked neon coffee cup, a low building with big front windows, long shadows of parked rigs stretching across a gravel lot. KETTLEFORD Depot, the sign declared in red script. Underneath, a blue stripe read, Showers Home Cooking Open All Night. Jonah felt some of his tension ease. It looked old-fashioned, but not in a bad way. Like the stops he'd cut his teeth on years earlier, before everything turned into identical chains. The lot was nearly full. That was the first thing that struck him as odd. For a truck stop he'd never heard of, out in the middle of nowhere, in thick fog at 2 in the morning, there were a surprising number of rigs tucked into the striped spaces. Their shapes loomed in the mist. A cab-over from another era, its boxy nose unmistakable. A faded green Freightliner with a logo he hadn't seen in at least a decade. A long-nosed Peterbilt with chrome that looked too clean for this much weather. He eased into the last open slot near the edge of the building and set his brakes. For a moment, he sat listening to the engine tick as it cooled, the quiet breathing of the reefer unit behind him, the muffled hum of generators and idling trucks around. Then he stepped down into the fog. It smelled faintly of wet asphalt and something warmer underneath, coffee, frying onions, the ghost of cigarette smoke long, since banned but never entirely scrubbed away. The neon sign buzzed softly overhead, its red letters haloed in the mist. At the fuel island, the pumps were the older mechanical kind with rolling number dials, the kind he hadn't used much since companies went to card readers and digital screens. The concrete underfoot was dry despite the fog, as if the ground here refused to get slick. He decided to top off first, sleep later. The pump face had no card slot, just the curling hose, the metal nozzle, and a sign that read, Pay Inside. He shrugged, reset the nozzle, and began fueling. The numbers on the dial spun in a steady blur, gallons counting up with a soft, ticking rhythm. For a moment, an odd impression tugged at him, like the dial spun faster than seemed possible given the flow, jumping ahead in little bursts. He blinked, and it looked normal again. When the tanks were full, he headed toward the building. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of coffee, frying food, and the faint sweetness of cheap air freshener. The interior could have come from a photograph in an old trucking magazine. Chrome stools at a long counter, vinyl booths, a row of pay phones along one wall, their cords neatly coiled. A glass case at the front displayed maps and CB handsets, none of them new. The place was busy. Half the stools were occupied by men and women in work shirts, some with company logos he recognized, some bearing names of carriers he knew had folded years ago. A group played cards at a corner table, laughter low but genuine. A woman in a denim jacket leaned back in her chair, boots crossed, telling a story in a voice as rough as gravel that made the others around her shake their heads and grin. Their clothes struck him first. Not costumes, but not quite current either. Ball caps with old patch designs. Jackets with reflective stripes in styles he hadn't seen in a long time. A few wore flannel shirts with company names long gone. Valley Star, Blue Ridge Transport, Northline. The jukebox in the corner glowed softly, cycling through old country tunes that sounded like they belonged on vinyl, not in a digital playlist. Jonah stepped up to the counter, where a middle-aged woman with a name tag that read Lorraine was pouring coffee. "Truck fuel on pump 4, he said. "Fill up." She glanced up, and for a second he had the strange feeling that she already knew what he was going to say. "Got you, sweetheart," she said, marking something on a pad. "You running through or sleeping a spell?" "Thinking a few hours in the bunk," he replied. "Fog's nasty." "Good call," she nodded like she approved. "We don't see many new faces on nights like this." He frowned. "New faces?" She just smiled and slid a mug toward him. "Coffee on the house. You look like you've still got miles to go later." He took a sip. It was strong and a little bitter, just the way he liked it. As he turned to find a seat, a voice from behind him said, "Hey, Jonah, you finally made it in, huh?" He turned. A man at the nearest booth, gray-bearded and broad-shouldered, was looking straight at him. His hat bore a logo from a carrier that had merged with another 15 years ago. A half-finished plate of eggs sat in front of him, steam barely visible. "Do I know you?" Jonah asked. The man chuckled. "Not yet, but I know you. Seen you on this road enough. Always figured you'd stop by eventually." "Lucky guess," Jonah said, trying to keep his tone light. "CB handles on the door, easy enough to pick out." "No," the man said mildly. "I mean I know you. Hail, Jonah. Been running this corridor since the late 90s. Bought your own rig 5 years back. Still miss the old Kenworth sometimes, don't you?" Jonah's throat went dry. "Dispatch chatty tonight?" he asked, but the joke felt weak. "Nah, dispatch doesn't talk to us much anymore." The older driver gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Sit a minute. You don't want to go back out right away, not with that river bridge ahead." Jonah hesitated. He'd been planning to fuel, shower, crash, and get rolling by dawn. But his feet moved almost on their own, and he found himself sliding into the booth. "How do you know my route?" he asked carefully. "The same way they knew mine," the other man said. "Road got patterns, people too, and this place," he glanced around. "This place pays attention to certain runs." Jonah followed his gaze. A corkboard hung on the far wall near the restrooms, a clutter of photos and notes pinned to it. He'd seen boards like it in 100 diners and truck stops. Lost dog flyers, business cards, snapshots of regulars. But as he looked more closely, he noticed that every photo had a rig in it somewhere. Some showed smiling drivers leaning against their trucks. Others were taken from farther back, trucks cresting hills, lined up at docks, parked under glowing signs. A handwritten sign above the board read, "Our own, past and present." Curiosity tugged at him. He stood. "Excuse me," he said and walked over. The pictures spanned decades. Faded Polaroids with 70s haircuts and striped trucks. Sun-bleached prints from the 80s. Grainy snapshots from cheap disposable cameras in the 90s. A few glossy digital prints in more recent corners. He scanned faces, not recognizing any at first. Then his eye snagged on one photo near the center. A man in his 30s leaned against a blue cab-over, grin cocky, cigarette between two fingers. Jonah knew that look. He'd seen it some mornings when he caught sight of himself in a mirror before coffee. A small, handwritten label beneath the photo read, "Mike Shorthauljenkins, lost at mile 233, River Bridge, 1994. His stomach flipped. He'd heard of that accident years ago. A chain reaction in heavy fog on the old river bridge. A handful of trucks, some cars, no spectacular fireball, nothing headline-grabbing, but enough to send people over the guardrail. Mile 233. He was still a couple hundred miles from there. He moved his gaze. More names, more dates, many of them paired with that same stretch of road. Lost NEAR 231. Lost at 235. A few from other places along the corridor, icy grades, blown tires, bad luck in construction zones. One photo near the top had no truck in it at all. Just the river bridge itself, veiled in fog, headlights barely visible at one end. The caption read, "First night, first one." An odd chill settled between his shoulder blades. He started to turn away and froze. Near the bottom of the board, in a space that looked like it hadn't been there long, a new photo had been tacked up. The edges weren't curled yet. The pushpin was still bright. In the picture, a white tractor trailer sat on the shoulder of a road he recognized as the one he was on tonight. Company logo on the door. Same model he drove. The angle was from ahead and a bit to the side, as if shot from another vehicle's cab. Leaning against the grill, arms folded, was Jonah. He wore the same jacket he had on now. Same ball cap. His expression in the picture wasn't quite a smile, more like a squint into sun that wasn't there. There was no caption. His pulse hammered in his ears. "Hey, Lorraine," a voice called from behind him. "Clock stuck again." He tore his gaze away from the photo. Above the counter, the wall clock showed 2:17. As he watched, the second hand ticked forward once, then shivered and jumped back. Jonah checked his watch. It read 2:17 as well. He could have sworn it had been later when he fueled. He turned slowly. The room's easy buzz of conversation had dimmed. Some people were still eating, still talking, but now and then someone's eyes flicked toward him. Not hostile, not curious exactly, more like sympathy. The gray-bearded driver from the booth had risen and come up beside him. "Sometimes," the man said quietly, "folks end up here after it's already happened. They just don't know it yet. Sometimes they come in before." "Before what?" Jonah managed. "Before the bridge. Before mile 233 in the fog. Before someone else changes lanes just wrong. Before their own judgment slips half an inch." Jonah swallowed. "What is this place?" "Call it a rest stop between versions," the man said. "Some stay, some don't get the choice." He nodded toward the uncaptioned photo of Jonah. "That one doesn't have writing because that page isn't written yet. For you, anyway." Jonah shook his head. "This is ridiculous. I'm tired. I need sleep." Lorraine's voice floated over from the counter. "You want a room upstairs, Jonah? We can give you one by the window. Good view of the highway, you know." He hadn't told her his name. He looked outside through the big front windows. The fog pressed up against the glass like a solid wall. Beyond it, vague shapes of trucks in the lot loomed and faded. For a moment, he thought he saw his own reflection there, not standing at the window but sitting in his rig, hazard lights flashing. In the distant blur of gray, faint pinpoints of light shimmered, like the suggestion of headlights on a bridge. "Your load's not that urgent," the gray-bearded driver said gently. "You could take the long way round. There's another crossing 20 miles upstream. Adds an hour. Saves more than that sometimes." "How do you know my route?" Jonah asked again. The man half smiled. "We pay attention. Hard not to when you've watched that stretch claim the same kinds of folks over and over." A woman's voice called from a back booth. "Let him decide, Daryl. You know how it works." Jonah realized he was breathing too fast. He forced his shoulders down, his jaw unclenched. He looked one last time at the board, at the faces and rigs, at his own picture with its blank space beneath. Then he stepped back. "I'm going," he said. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "I'm not taking that bridge tonight." Daryl studied him, then nodded once. "Then you'd better hurry before the fog decides for you." He walked Jonah to the door. "Out to the access road," the older driver said quietly. "Take a left instead of a right. Your GPS won't like it, but it'll catch up once you're past the river. Don't stop on the shoulder no matter how bad you want to." "You talk like you've done this before," Jonah said. Daryl's eyes had the faraway look of someone remembering a different night. "Let's just say I didn't get to make that turn, back when it was my choice." Jonah stepped into the fog. For a moment, the sounds of the diner pressed at his back. Silverware murmured voices, the jukebox quietly spinning an old tune. Then the door shut with a soft click, and the world narrowed to the damp air and the hulking shadow of his truck. He climbed in, started the engine, and checked his fuel gauge. It read full. Past full, even, the needle nudging a mark it usually didn't reach even on a complete fill. He hadn't paid, he hadn't signed anything. No receipt lay on the dash. He pulled out of the slot slowly, the other trucks barely visible shapes in the gray. At the lot's exit, a faded sign pointed right with the words "To Interstate" in peeling paint. He turned left. The access road felt different this way, tighter, more winding. For a few minutes, his GPS arrow spun in confusion, insisting he turn around. Then, as he crossed an invisible line, the map snapped, recalibrated, and drew a new path along a lesser-used state route that paralleled the river. He drove in silence, hands steady on the wheel. The fog clung stubbornly, but little by little it began to thin. Trees took shape. The faint suggestion of water appeared to his right, a darker strip cutting through the land. 30 minutes later, the alternate bridge rose ahead, wider shoulders, newer guardrails. The fog here was nothing more than a light haze over the water. He crossed with his eyes on the far bank, not looking down. On the opposite side, blue strobes flashed in the distance, far upstream. As he merged onto the main interstate again, his CB crackled. A strained voice came through. "Westbound, you got a mess up around 233. Multi-vehicle. Bridge is a parking lot." "Anybody hurt?" another voice asked. "Can't tell yet. Fog up their suit. Troopers are closing it down. They're gonna route folks around once they get control." Jonah's hands tightened on the wheel. He passed a sign that read mile 231. Through a break in the trees, he glimpsed the distant span of the river bridge shrouded in a thicker bank of fog, emergency lights staining the mist blue and red. He drove on, heart heavy and grateful in equal measure. Hours later, at a large, modern travel plaza far down the line, he parked for his mandated break. The bright lights and familiar logos felt almost jarring after Kettleford's worn neon. Inside, by the coffee machine, an older driver with a weathered face was swapping stories. "Ever hear about that old depot on the detour road?" the man asked someone. "Kettleford used to be a stop for everyone before they built the bypass." Jonah turned his head. "Was," someone echoed. "Closed it down after they rerouted the interstate," the older driver said. "Place fell apart. Some folks say you can still see the sign in heavy fog. Swear. They've fueled there. I figure it's just stories. Photographs of it look rough, boarded windows, pumps rusted out, that kind of thing." He shrugged. "But I will say this. You hear enough tailies about drivers seeing themselves on a wall in there, you start paying attention to the weather around that river." Back in his cab, Jonah opened his logbook. A small slip of paper fell out, landing on his lap. It was an old-style fuel receipt, the paper thin and slightly yellowed. Across the top, in faded ink, the words KETTLEFORD Depot were printed in a looping font. The amount of fuel matched what he'd put in that night. The date line was smudged, unreadable except for the year, which looked like it might have been written over more than once. There was no signature, no name. He stared at it for a long time, then tucked it carefully into the back of the logbook. From then on, whenever dense fog swallowed the road ahead and the hum of the tires took on that hypnotic, endless quality, Jonah watched the exit numbers more closely. If he ever saw a sign for Kettleford again, he told himself, he wasn't sure whether he'd stop or roll past. Either way, he knew one thing. He would not take the old river bridge in thick fog again. Some chances, once glimpsed from the other side, didn't feel like chances at all. Story number 7. Danielle Crowley had heard about the underground warehouses, but she'd never driven into one. Drivers talked about them at truck stop counters. Old limestone mines and caves turned into vast storage complexes. Miles of tunnels lined with docks and cargo, everything kept at a cool, constant temperature year-round. The way they described it, the places sounded like parking a semi in the middle of a science fiction movie. When the broker offered her a good-paying overnight drop at one of those facilities, she took it. The delivery instructions mentioned the name only once in clean, bland letters at the top: SUBTRRA Logistics Complex, North Entrance. The address was just a rural route, a mile marker, a set of coordinates. There were no directions in or out, no mention of the layout inside. Just check-in AT guard station outside tunnel. Follow all painted lane MARKINGS. No access to East GALLERAES. That last line had been in all caps. By the time she reached the turnoff, it was close to midnight. The highway shoulders were empty, the world reduced to illuminated pavement and black trees. A small blue sign appeared on the right: SUBTRRA Logistics, truck entrance 1 mile. Her GPS showed nothing but a thin gray road peeling away from the interstate, ending in blank space. No building icon, no lot, just an abrupt dead end, as if the mapping system hadn't bothered with whatever lay underground. Danny rubbed her eyes, rolled her shoulders, and took the exit. The access road curved between low hills, then straightened. Ahead, a slope rose, its face cut with a wide, rectangular opening. Yellow sodium lights glowed around it, throwing long shadows over the gravel staging area outside. Above the opening, large metal letters bolted into the rock spelled out: SUBTRRA North. It was like driving up to the mouth of a mine. A small guardhouse sat just off the lane, lit from within. A barrier arm blocked the tunnel entrance. Danny pulled her rig up to the stop line and set her brakes, the sound echoing faintly off stone. The guard stepped out as she rolled her window down. He wore a reflective vest and a ball cap with the facility's logo, his badge clipped neatly to his pocket. He looked a little older than her, with creases at the corners of his eyes that came from night shifts and fluorescent lights. "Evening," he said. "Company name and trailer number." She gave him the information. He checked a clipboard, nodded, and stepped to the front of her truck, shining his flashlight over the cab and the trailer. "You been in here before?" he asked, returning to her window. "First time," she said. "Anything I need to know?" He pointed toward the tunnel. "Once you're inside, you'll lose GPS and cell. That's normal. You'll have internal signage. Stay on the green line painted on the floor until you reach Dock 29 and do not follow any red lines. Those go to the east galleries. They're closed." "Closed for what?" she asked. He hesitated the barest fraction. "Structural work. Just don't go that way. You won't need to. Your dock's on the north loop." "Got it. Green line, Dock 29 and no red." He studied her a second longer, then added, "If you feel turned around, stop. Don't keep driving. Someone will come find you." "I'll manage," she said lightly. He raised the barrier arm. "Head on in, then. It'll feel strange at first, but just remember it's still a road." The tunnel swallowed her truck. The change was immediate. The familiar open feel of highway driving vanished. Above the cab, rock arched in a roughly hewn ceiling, braced here and there with concrete. Fluorescent fixtures ran in lines overhead, casting a steady, humming glow on smooth pavement. The temperature dropped, cool air whispering around the mirrors. Her GPS blinked, lost its signal, and froze. On the smooth concrete ahead, a thick green line had been painted down the center of the right-hand lane. Smaller arrows at intervals pointed forward, stenciled in matching green. She followed them. The first dock bays appeared quickly, carved into the stone walls like garage doors for giants. Metal dock doors, some closed, some open, were numbered in neat stenciled characters. 1N, 2N, 3N. A few trucks were already backed in, their trailers snug against the seals, their tractors angled in cutouts that served as parking spaces. The sound in the underground complex was different. Every engine noise bounced off rock and concrete, layering into a dull, constant rumble. Beeps from revering forklifts echoed strangely, their location hard to place. Air moved in a low, steady rush through overhead ventilation ducts, like distant wind in a cavern. Danny's rig felt too loud. She eased along, watching the numbers climb. 10N14 and 21 and the green line curved gently, hugging a wide loop deeper into the mine. Between some sets of docks, cross aisles branched off, their floor markings painted in different colors, yellow, blue, and here and there red. As she passed one of those red-marked corridors, she glanced down it. The lighting there was dimmer. The red line on the floor ran straight and unwavering into that half-dark, its surface older and more worn. She saw no trucks, no forklifts, just a row of dock doors in shadow. A sign bolted to the wall beside that corridor read, East Galleras, no through traffic, authorized personnel only. She kept going. Dock 29N appeared on the right, its door raised, a green light glowing over it. A painted arrow on the floor indicated where she should angle her tractor to back in. It was, she admitted, better laid out than many above-ground facilities. She swung wide, checked her mirrors, and backed the trailer slowly into position. The usual soft thump when the rear met the dock bumpers sounded sharper down here, echoing once before fatting. When she set her brakes and dropped the trailer, the quiet that settled felt thick. She stepped out, her boots clicking on the smooth concrete. The air smelled faintly of dust, rubber, and something metallic and cold. A buzzer by a gray personnel door next to Dock 29N caught her eye. Above it, a sign, Check-in driver entrance. Inside, a narrow hallway led to a small office with a high counter. A woman sat behind an old plastic keyboard, her face lit by the glow of a monitor. Crowley Danielle, she asked as soon as Danny stepped up. Yeah. Drop 29N, pick up 34N, the woman recited, not looking at any paper. Empty's ready, just hook and go. No paperwork to sign, it's all electronic tonight. That's it, Danny asked. That's it, the woman said. Restrooms are down the hall if you need them. Please exit within 30 minutes of dropping your trailer. Company rule. Facility rule. On the way back out, Danny paused at a small glass display case on the wall. Inside were faded photographs, black and white shots of mining equipment, men in helmets with lamps, early construction of the underground roads. One picture showed a long row of trucks lined up at rocky docks, the old-style cabs square and tall. A small plaque beneath the photos read, SUBTRRA from Mine to Market ESD, 1965. Another tucked off to the side carried a different tone. East Gallery Incident, 1987, 12 lost. There were no further details. She found Dock 34N easily enough. The empty trailer sat waiting, its doors closed, its reflective tape catching the fluorescent light in sharp, clean lines. It looked newer than most of the equipment she'd seen inside. She backed under, latch, did a quick walk around. Everything checked out. Back in the cab, she took a breath and started forward, picking up the green line again. It led toward a wide curve that seemed to complete the loop back to the tunnel entrance. Overhead, a sign indicated exit ramp, 1-2 mile. She relaxed a little. The complex looked less strange now. It was just a warehouse in stone. The odd echo of engines and the constant cool did get under the skin, but there was a certain efficiency to it all. Get in, get out, keep rolling. Halfway to the exit, a forklift crossed in front of her, its warning lights strobing. The driver waved, a quick, distracted motion, and disappeared between two loaded trailers. The green line split. One branch continued straight, arrowed toward exit. The other hooked unexpectedly to the left, toward another corridor. The paint was newer on that offshoot, its edges crisp. For a second, her headlights caught the sign by that leftward passage. East Galleras, temporary route. She frowned. The guard had told her the east galleries were closed, but maybe that was only for certain areas. Maybe overnight they opened a cut-through to ease congestion. An overhead light flickered, buzzing audibly, then steadied. The painted exit arrow for the straight path was chipped, worn. The green arrow for the left turn gleamed fresher. The part of her that hated surprises liked the idea of following the line exactly. She hesitated only a moment, then steered left. The sound changed almost at once. The hum of the main ventilation dropped away, replaced by a lower, more distant rush. The fluorescent fixtures were spaced farther apart here, pools of light separated by longer stretches of shadow. The green line on the floor stayed bright, almost too bright, pulling the eye. Docks here bore different numbers. 40E, 41E, 42E. The stenciling looked older. Some of the doors were dented, paint scraped. The air smelled faintly different, drier, with a tang of dust. There were trucks here, backed into some of the bays. Danny's first thought was that they all looked outdated. Square-nosed tractors with rounded edges. Logos from carriers she recognized from old magazines, not current billboards. Their marker lights were on. Idling trucks made noise even from the rear. The soft rattle of an engine at rest, the faint vibration. These rigs sat completely still. No exhaust, no sound. She eased her own truck slower, rolling at barely 10 miles an hour. A man in a high-visibility vest stepped out from between two trailers up ahead. His back was to her, his shoulders a little slumped, hands pushed into his pockets as if against a chill. His vest's reflective stripes caught her headlights. Relief flickered, someone to ask. She tapped her air horn lightly, 2 quick notes. The figure didn't start, didn't turn, just kept walking parallel to the line, away from her, toward deeper bays. She brought the truck to a stop, set her brakes, and rolled down the window. "Hey," she called, "exits this way, right." The man kept moving, pace unchanging. The underground air felt heavier on her face now, the engine's own idle louder than it should have been. "Hey," she called again, more sharply. No response. Something in the way he walked began to bother her. It wasn't just that he didn't turn. It was that his steps never seemed to fall in and out of the bleed of her headlights. The reflective stripes on his vest stayed the same dim brightness, no matter how far along the dock row he moved. She blinked. In the ounce of darkness between light fixtures, he passed out of direct beam and didn't appear in the next patch. The space between trailers was simply empty. Danny swallowed, reached for her shifter almost automatically, and released the brakes. The green line continued, but now it wavered. Not the paint itself, that stayed crisp and straight, but each time she rolled over a section under a fluorescent tube, in the instant before the light hit, she had the uneasy sense that the line ahead shifted, zigzagging like someone had tried to paint over a different path. The feeling vanished as the bulbs lit the way. A sign above a nearby dock read, 43E. Next to it, painted smaller on the rock, were 3 horizontal white lines. They looked like someone's private mark rather than official stripping. Her mirror showed rows of dock doors receding into gloom. Her CB gave a small, strangled crackle, then spat out a burst of static that sounded almost like a voice cleared its throat. She reached for the mic, paused, and set her hand back on the wheel. The green route arrow ahead suddenly split again, one line carrying on, another veering even deeper left toward where the concrete turned darker and the lights hung lower. A metal sign on the wall there, partially obscured by grime, showed egress, in one direction and east gallery spur in the other. Someone had spray painted over the arrows years ago, an uneven smear that didn't quite hide them. Her headlights flashed over another sign, older and bent. Incident area, authorized access only. She braked where she was. The hum in the concrete under her boots felt wrong now, as if a deeper vibration had taken up residence beneath the usual engine and refrigeration thrum. The guard's words surfaced in her memory. If you feel turned around, stop. Don't keep driving. Danny clicked her 4 ways on. Red and orange lights strobed weakly against the stone walls, washing over the line on the floor. The fluorescent above her flickered again and went out. For a long second, the only light came from her own headlamps and running lights, cutting two bright tunnels through the darkness ahead. The edges of her beams caught shapes that hadn't been there a moment ago, trailer backs, closer together, cage-like fences along one side, something that looked like a small office door with shattered glass. Then the overhead tube snapped back on with a pop. The corridor ahead was just road and dock doors again, spaced as before. Her heart hammered. "It's just old wiring," she said out loud. "Underground. Humidity, that's all." The CB crackled again. Through the static, a fragment of a voice slipped, thin and distant. "Anyone in East shouldn't be. Get out." Then silence. Danny reached down and turned the CB volume all the way down. She took her feet off the pedals and sat for a moment, hands loose on the wheel, listening to the echo of her engine, the faint rattle of something dripping in the distance, the distant roar of air in vents. The need to move, to not stay frozen here, crawled up her spine. Slowly, she eased the truck backward, following the green line in reverse until she reached the last definite directional sign she trusted, the one that had pointed clearly toward exit on the more worn portion of the loop. Backing a semi along a painted stripe in an underground tunnel was not any driving school's idea of a good time, but she took it inch by inch, mirrors full of pale concrete and green paint, until she could straighten and bring the truck back to the main loop. When she merged again with the better lit section, the difference was immediate. The air felt lighter, the lights hummed brighter, the docks looked newer. Her pulse slowly eased. Minutes later, the tunnel ramp curled upward. Her GPS came back to life with a soft chime as she left the mine and emerged into the cool night air. The stars overhead looked brighter than they had an hour before, as if grateful to be seen again. At the guard shack, the same man stepped out as she slowed. "Quick in and out," he said. "All good." "Found my way," she replied. His gaze lingered on her face. "You stayed on the green line." "Yes," she said after only a tiny pause. He nodded, relief visible in the way his shoulders lowered half an inch. "Good. Sometimes folks get curious, head toward the old sections." He jerked his chin toward the dark opening. "They don't map right anymore. Echoes, old road layouts, systems trying to fill in gaps." "Is that what it is?" she asked. "Echoes." He rubbed at a mark on his clipboard with his thumb. "You ever been in a place where something bad happened but they rebuilt right on top of it? People walk through without knowing. But some nights, certain corners feel colder or the power blinks there more. Like the building remembers. Down there, the rock remembers too." She glanced back at the tunnel mouth. From here, it was just a lit rectangle cut into stone. No hint of confusing corridors or silent trucks backed into forgotten bays. "What happened in the East Galleries?" she asked. His jaw worked. For a moment she thought he might brush it off with talk of construction or minor accidents. Instead, he said quietly, "Roof fall, long time ago, before they cut all the safety exits they've got now. Some rigs, some forklift drivers, some crew. They sealed off the worst of it, rerouted everything. But air moves strange in caves. Sound does too." He flipped his clipboard, as if to end the subject. "We log everyone in and out up here now," he said, businesslike. "Every truck that enters has to exit. That's the rule." "What about the ones from before?" Danny asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then he tapped the side of his head with one finger. "Depends who you ask," he said. "Some of the old-timers say they still hear air horns in sections that have been concreted over. See clearance lights where there aren't any trucks. Me, I stay at the booth and watch the list." He held the clipboard up for a second, at just the right angle for her to see. The names and truck numbers were handwritten. Next to her own, a time in and time out were neatly recorded. Near the bottom of the sheet, a line was ruled off. Below it, in a different ink, were a cluster of names and numbers with the date 1987 written at the top. Each of those lines ended with a different word. RECOVERED. RECOVERED. Unrecovered. The last category had 3 entries. Beside one of those, the initials for the East Galleries incident matched the small plaque she'd read on the wall. The truck number was from a series she recognized vaguely from old trucking photos. Shorter, older-style trailers, numbering formats no one used anymore. Her gaze snagged on one more thing. At the very bottom of the page, below the old names, someone had written a faint note in pencil, almost erased. Route ADJUSTD, green only. The guard flipped the clipboard down again. "You're clear to go, Ms. Crowley," he said. "Drive safe." She rolled the window up and pulled away, gravel crunching under her tires before the smoother feel of asphalt took over. On the interstate miles later, the sky still stretched wide and unconcerned. The memory of the underground roads clung to her, though, the strange sense of ancient space repurposed for something modern, with layers of old paths still lingering underneath. In the weeks that followed, when dispatch called with offers for another Subterra run at night, she didn't say no. The money was good. The facility on paper was efficient and safe. But she always insisted on a daytime appointment. And she always, without exception, stayed on whatever line they painted for her, no matter how faded it looked. More than once, on foggy nights hundreds of miles away, she'd pass under a bridge or through a dim underpass and catch a glimpse of clearance lights in the distance where no truck should be. When that happened, she'd check the road markings beneath her wheels, just to be sure she was where she was meant to be, on this version of the route, and not one the stone hadn't quite let go. Story number 8. Marcus Trent liked that his route almost never surprised him. He ran the same line haul most nights of the week, city to city, 6 hours each way, drop and hook on both ends. The highway in between was familiar enough that he could have sketched it from memory. The long, flat stretches, the gentle hills, the odd curves where the road bent around old towns. There was one spot he always used as a mental halfway mark, a concrete overpass at mile 118. It wasn't anything special, just a gray bridge carrying a county road over the interstate, a green sign overhead with a route number, a bit of lazy graffiti on one pillar, but seeing it meant he was making good time. After that, the miles seemed to fall away faster. On clear nights, he barely noticed it. On rainy ones, he watched the way his headlights smeared across the damp concrete as he passed under, a brief tunnel in the open road. He never thought of it as anything more than that. The night everything changed, the weather was between things. Not rain, not fog, just a fine mist that turned distant lights into soft halos. The sky was a low, unbroken gray, swallowing the moon. Traffic was lighter than usual. His trailer was loaded with dry goods, not particularly heavy, not fussy about temperature. Dispatch had mentioned possible construction near mile 160, but otherwise the run was routine. Marcus settled in with a travel mug of coffee, his favorite playlist low, and the soft glow of his dash keeping him company. The green highway signs ticked past, 93, 101, 109. He watched the miles, feeling the rhythm of them. At 1:02 a.m., according to his dash clock, the sign he expected appeared out of the mist. Mile 118. Ahead, the overpass loomed, its underside dark against the gray sky. The graffiti on the right-hand support, a looping word he could never quite read, flashed by as his headlights reached for it. His radio, tuned to a talk station, crackled for a heartbeat. The host's voice vanished into static. For that 1 second, the air inside the cab felt oddly thick, like the hush in a room before someone says something important. Then it passed. The static cleared. The host's voice came back mid-sentence as if nothing had happened. Marcus exhaled without realizing he'd held his breath. "Need more sleep," he muttered, taking a sip of coffee. He rolled on. At mile 139, there was a small truck plaza he liked. The pumps were quick, the staff friendly, the coffee less terrible than most. His fuel was fine for now, but he decided on a short break anyway. 10 minutes to walk around the rig and stretch would keep him sharper. He pulled in, parked, took a brief loop around the truck, then went inside for a refill. The clock above the counter read 1:17 a.m. "Fast night," he said to the cashier, more to make conversation than anything. "Faster if you're not standing here," the man replied with a grin. Back on the interstate, Marcus checked his trip meter out of habit. The numbers matched what they should. A little over 140 miles since he'd left the depot. Everything felt normal, steady. The mist seemed a bit thinner now, the world a bit wider. 15-20 minutes later, the road settled into that blank stretch where nothing much changed. The white lines came and went under his tires. The occasional distant headlights approached, passed, disappeared. The hum of the engine was soothing. He glanced down at his dash clock. 1:32 a.m. His gaze flicked back up in time to catch another green sign sliding out of the haze. Mile 118. Marcus blinked. That wasn't possible. He'd already passed mile 118 nearly half an hour ago. The truck stopped, the coffee, the extra dozen-odd miles, all of that lay behind him. The odometer confirmed it. He leaned forward slightly, frowning at the sign as if a closer look would reveal some trick of his eyes. Mile 118, plain as anything, same font, same reflective paint. The overpass rose ahead, exactly where it would be if he were there for the first time. Same chipped guardrail, same indecipherable spray paint on the support pillar. His skin prickled. Maybe they repeated the number by mistake, he said aloud, trying to anchor himself with the sound of his own voice. Sign shop error. Happens. But then his headlights swept under the bridge, and he saw the shape on the shoulder. A tractor-trailer sat on the right side of the road just beyond the overpass, hazard lights pulsing a steady orange. The trailer was at a slight angle, like it had eased carefully onto the rumble strip and stopped. Its reflective tape burned bright in his beams. The tractor was white, so was his. The company name on the door was the same as his own. So was the logo. Even the placement of the dot numbers matched. Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. He slowed, signaling a lane change into the left, giving the stopped rig space. As he drew alongside, he looked for signs of damage, for someone outside flagging him down. There was no one in the road. Through the passenger window of the parked truck, he glimpsed the interior of the cab, a steering wheel, a hanging air freshener, the vague outline of a driver's seat. In the faint light from the dash, a figure sat there still. Marcus couldn't make out features, just the impression of a person's shape, head bowed forward a fraction as if staring down at something in their lap, or sleeping, or... He forced his eyes back to the lane as he passed. Maybe he's on the phone, Marcus said to the empty cab, or working his logbook, or waiting on a tow. His heart didn't believe it. He grabbed the CB mic. Southbound, anyone got eyes on that white tractor sitting just past 118? Looks like one of ours. Driver, you okay in there? Static hissed back. No one answered. The stop-shoulder rig's hazard lights dimmed in his mirror, swallowed by mist. He felt suddenly, acutely alone. His trip meter still showed the extra miles since 118. His fuel gauge had dipped the amount he expected. The world in the cab said time had passed. The green sign had not agreed. He drove on. The stretch between 118 and 160 felt longer than usual. His thoughts kept circling back to the parked truck, to the bowed head in the cab, to the way the CB had refused to carry his voice to anyone. The construction he'd been warned about never materialized. No barrels appeared, no lane closures, just empty road. At another small rest area, a wide pullout with a couple of picnic tables and a line of trees, he decided to stop. His shoulders ached. His brain felt too loud. He turned into the lot and saw another rig already parked there, a battered blue Kenworth with a faded mural on the sleeper. Its engine was off. A single dim light glowed behind the curtain. As he shut down and stepped out into the cool air, the door of the Kenworth opened. A woman in a flannel shirt and worn jeans climbed down, stretching her back until it popped. "Foggy enough for you," she called, voice carrying easily in the quiet. "Not fog," Marcus said, "just weird air." She chuckled. "That's one way to put it." Up close, he noticed the name on her door. CROWLEY Transport, an independent maybe or a small fleet. Her hair was streaked with gray at the temples. Her eyes were sharp. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. He thought about brushing it off. Then, unexpectedly, the words came out. "Pass mile 118 twice," he said. "Same overpass, same graffiti. Even saw a truck on the shoulder after it that looked exactly like mine. Odometer says I've been moving forward. Signs don't agree." Her expression changed very slightly. The humor left it, replaced by something like recognition. "You run this route a lot?" she asked. "Every weeknight," he said, "for years." "And you watch your signs?" "I'm not that tired." She nodded slowly. "You ever hear about the wreck at that bridge a few years back?" He had a brief mention when it happened. Chain reaction in bad weather, early hours of the morning. A couple of cars, a truck, nothing that made huge national news, but enough that drivers talked about it for a while. "Yeah," he said. "Fog, someone hit the brakes, everyone else followed." "They say after that," the woman said, "the mile marker there got strange on some nights. Folks swear they pass it more than once. Some see their own rigs pulled over. Some hear their own handles called on the radio from up ahead." "That's not funny," Marcus said. "If this is a story." "I'm not telling it to scare you," she said calmly. "I'm telling it so you don't drive blind into something you should see coming." He looked past her through the trees. The interstate hummed softly just out of sight. No lights flashed. No sirens wailed. It was just another Tuesday night by all appearances. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked. "Next time you see that bridge," she said, "really see it. Ask yourself if you've been making real choices since the first time you went under it tonight, or if you've just been repeating yourself." He frowned. "That doesn't mean anything." "It will if it has to," she said. She climbed back into her cab, gave him a brief, almost apologetic smile, and shut the door. He stood in the rest area for a long minute, then shook himself, climbed back into his own truck and got moving. The mist pressed close again as he accelerated. The highway took him back into its long, straight arms. He watched each mile sign. 120, 121, 122. Relief began to build. Maybe he'd imagined the second 118. Maybe he'd misread in the half-sleep of a long night. Maybe the white truck on the shoulder belonged to a different division, a coincidence of paint and logo. 128, 133, 141. The road curved gently. Trees crowded closer for a while, making the world feel narrower. His headlights cut twin paths through the gray. Up ahead, green glowed faintly. His stomach tightened. Mile 118. The overpass rose out of the mist, every line of it identical to the others he'd seen. Same guardrail, same graffiti, same angle of the approaching county road. This time, there was no truck on the shoulder. There was, however, something else. On the right side, just before the bridge, a small white cross stood in the grass. A piece of reflective tape wrapped around its arm caught his beams. Something dark, maybe a cap or a scrap of cloth, hung from it, swinging slightly in the breeze from passing trucks. As his lights hit it at just the right angle, he jolted. The cap looked exactly like the one he kept on his own dash. Same logo, same stain on the brim. His dash clock read 1:17 a.m. He'd seen that time already tonight. The radio, which had been nothing but low music for the last stretch, crackled once. A news announcer's voice came through, crisp and calm. "Investigating an early morning crash near mile marker 118, the voice said. "The name of the truck driver has not yet been released, pending notification of next of kin, authorities say." Marcus's hand shot to the power knob. The radio cut off. His heart was thudding so hard he could feel it in his fingertips. Ahead, the underpass gaped. He did the one thing truckers avoided unless they had no other choice. He eased onto the shoulder, hazard lights clicking on, and brought the rig to a stop before he reached the shadow of the bridge. In his mirror, the mist behind him looked normal, occasional pinpricks of light where other vehicles moved. Ahead, past the overpass, the world seemed flatter, quieter. No headlights approached from the far side. No taillights receded into the distance. He sat there, breathing, watching. If he rolled under as he always did, same lane, same speed, same casual glance at the graffiti, what exactly was he choosing? Or not choosing? He pulled his paper atlas from the side pocket, hands only slightly shaking, and flipped to the map of this stretch. The highway was thick and bold. A thinner gray line crossed it at mile 118, labeled as a county road. Running roughly parallel for a few miles was another faint line, an old service route, curving on and off before rejoining at mile 121. He'd never taken it. It was slower, a few extra minutes at best. No one used it unless there was construction. The woman's words echoed. "Have you been making real choices?" He put the atlas down, checked his mirrors again, and flipped on his turn signal. The exit for the county road was just ahead, on the right, a short ramp leading up to intersect with the bridge above. Past that, a faded sign he'd never paid attention to before pointed along the old service route, frontage road, local access. He eased off the shoulder, stayed in the right lane, and took the ramp. His truck climbed toward the bridge deck instead of slipping under it. At the top, the county road ran left-right. To his left, the bridge crossed the interstate. To his right, the frontage road dropped back down and curved away through a stand of trees. He paused at the stop sign, foot on the brake. Through the gap in the guardrail, he could see the highway below, his headlights on the approach, the empty space beyond the overpass where no headlights moved. The air above the bridge felt thinner, cleaner, like he'd stepped out of a crowded room. He turned right. The frontage road ran rough, its asphalt patched and cracked, but it held. Trees arched over it, branches dripping mist. For a few seconds, the interstate ran parallel to his left, then dipped out of sight. As he curved gently back toward where the map showed a re-entry, something strange happened. In the side window, reflected in the dark glass, he saw another truck. Same make, same model, same company name on the door. It rolled steadily along the interstate where he would have been if he hadn't turned. It passed under the gray shape of the overpass without slowing. For a breath, he saw himself in that truck's driver's seat. Same cap, same set of the jaw, eyes fixed ahead. Then the angle shifted, the reflection broke, and the view became only trees and his own interior again. The frontage road merged back onto the highway at mile 121. As his tires hit the smoother lanes, Marcus checked his mirrors. The overpass at 118 was behind him now, just a darker smudge in the distance. The white cross by the shoulder was a pinprick. He turned the radio back on, hand hesitant on the knob. Traffic is being rerouted around mile marker 118 tonight due to an earlier incident, the announcer was saying. Authorities report that the driver of the involved truck has been transported from the scene, condition undisclosed. Names have not yet been released. Ahead, blue and red flashes painted the low clouds, far up the road. Marcus drove on. Months later, when the mist came in low and the world felt a little less certain at the edges, he still took that frontage road without fail. The extra minutes didn't bother him. He'd rather have them at the end of the run than gamble them under unremarkable concrete. Sometimes, as he coasted down the ramp, he'd see other trucks sail under the overpass below, their lights steady, their paths unbroken. Most nights, nothing unusual happened that he could see. But every once in a while, when the air felt just a bit too still, he'd glimpse in the corner of his eye a white tractor trailer on the shoulder by the bridge, hazard lights blinking, cab dark. He never tried to count how many times he saw it. Some numbers, he decided, were better not committed to memory.